Hi everyone, welcome to Paranormal M. I hope you're doing okay tonight. Before we start, if you like the stories in this video, please give it a like. And if you've ever experienced something paranormal that you can't explain, you can send it to me. Tonight's first story is about Phi Tai Tang Klom, one of the most feared ghosts in Thai folklore. It's a tragic story about a woman who died during pregnancy or childbirth. So settle in, turn the lights down if you want, and listen along. I hope you sleep well tonight. I want to tell you about one of the darkest and saddest figures in Thai ghost folklore. She is known as Phi Tai Tang Klom, the spirit of a woman who dies while pregnant or while giving birth. And in Thai belief, this is not just any ghost. This is a spirit shaped by grief, fear, love, and unfinished longing all at once. People believe she becomes powerful because her death is sudden and unnatural. She leaves the world before she is ready. She may still be holding on to her child, her home, her husband, her life. And because that love has nowhere to go, it twists into something restless. That is what makes this spirit so frightening. She is not only angry, she is heartbroken. One of the most famous legends connected to this belief is the story of May Nok of Pra Kanong, a young woman who died during childbirth while her husband was away. But even after death, she returned to their home as if nothing had happened. She cooked, cared for the house, and waited for him. At night, people said they heard her singing softly to her baby. The villagers were terrified because they knew the truth. May Nok was gone. Her child was gone too. But her love had stayed behind. There is one scene from the legend that people still remember. A lime rolls away and falls beneath the house. Instead of walking down to pick it up, May Nok stretches her arm impossibly far, reaching down from above to retrieve it. That is when the truth becomes impossible to ignore. She is no longer human. People also say her spirit caused fear around Wat Mahabut, where monks tried to calm her restless soul. Some versions of the story say she appeared in impossible places, even hanging upside down from the beams of a sacred hall. It is a strange and chilling image, but beneath it is something deeply painful. May Nok was not simply haunting people for the sake of terror. She was refusing to let go. And maybe that is why this kind of ghost has stayed in Thai memory for so long. The fear comes from the supernatural, yes. But the sadness comes from something very human. A mother separated from her child. A wife separated from her husband. A life cut short before its love could be completed. Similar beliefs appear in other parts of Southeast Asia and even in Chinese traditions, where people speak of the danger of one body, two spirits. The idea is that when two lives are lost together, the sorrow becomes heavier and the spirit becomes stronger. So when people speak of Phi Tai Tang Klom, they are not only speaking of a ghost. They are speaking of grief that never found peace. This happened around 2007 or 2008, when I was still a kid. Before I get into it, I should give a little bit of background, because the place itself matters. The farm is in Zululand, South Africa, and it had been in my family since the early 1970s when my grandparents bought it. That whole area is heavy with history. Within roughly 150 kilometers of the farm, there are battlefields and monuments everywhere, going back to conflicts between the Zulu, the Boers, and the British. Some of those battles happened in the 1800s, some much later. It is the kind of land where you can almost feel that people lived, fought, died, and left pieces of themselves behind. When my grandparents bought the farm, they were told a few unsettling things about it. Apparently, sometime in the 1930s, A housekeeper had been murdered there. They were also told that a previous owner had taken his own life in the main bedroom of the farmhouse. And there was one strange thing about that room that never really went away. A patch on the ceiling would always stain this yellowish-orange color. Everyone assumed it was water damage, but no matter how many times it was painted over, no matter if the boards were replaced, the stain would come back within days. There were also old traditional Zulu graves on the farm grounds, and as far as I know, they had never been disturbed. Now, this particular story happened inside the house, around the dining area and the corridor. My grandparents had gone into town that day, so my younger brother and I, we were about 6 and 8 at the time, were left at the farm with the housekeepers and cattle workers. I should say, they were like family to us. There was never any fear that we would be hurt or treated badly. We grew up around them. At some point, the workers went off for lunch, so my brother and I were alone in the yard. We were playing with BB guns, shooting at little targets we had set up. Then my grandparents came back from town. We ran over to help carry the groceries into the house, like we always did. We would bring everything into the kitchen and help my grandmother pack things away. The first time we walked through the dining area, past the bookshelf, everything looked normal. Nothing was out of place. But the second time we passed that same bookshelf, carrying groceries, every single book had been thrown out. They were all over the floor. Some were scattered across the dining table. It looked like someone had grabbed armfuls of them and just tossed them everywhere. My grandmother immediately blamed us. And honestly, I cannot really blame her. We were young, full of energy, and always getting into something. Plus, everyone else was outside having lunch, so, in her mind, who else could it have been? We said sorry, even though we knew we had not done it. We helped fix the bookshelf, put everything back, and then went outside again. After that, my brother and I went down to my grandfather's workshop. We started messing around with some tools and old motor parts he had lying around. Nothing serious, just kids being kids. About 45 minutes later, my grandmother and both of the housekeepers came running down from the house. They were scared. Not annoyed, not pretending, but genuinely frightened. They begged my grandfather to come inside and get the blue man out of the house. That was how they described him. The blue man. My grandfather went straight up to the house while my grandmother and the two women stayed with us. A few minutes later, he came back out furious. He started arguing with them in Afrikaans and Zulu, telling them he did not have time for games. But they insisted there had been a man inside the house. They said he was throwing furniture around, smashing dishes, and shouting that everyone had to get off his property. But when my grandfather went in, the house was perfect. Nothing broken, nothing moved, no dishes smashed, no furniture overturned. Everything was exactly where it should have been. That night, nobody wanted to split up, so we all slept in the main bedroom. My grandfather kept his weapon close, just in case there really was someone on the property trying to scare us or break in. Sometime in the early hours of the morning, we woke up to my grandmother screaming. She was in the corridor, just across from the dining room. My brother and I ran behind my grandfather, and that was when we saw him. A man. He ran into the spare bedroom, which was the room my brother and I used whenever we stayed there during school holidays. My grandfather charged after him, shouting at him to get out of the house. For context, my grandfather Peter was not a small or nervous man. He was a military veteran, about 6'4", broad, heavy-set, and back then, he did not take nonsense from anyone. If there had been a real person in that room, I honestly believe my grandfather would have dragged him out himself. But that is not what happened. He ran into the room. Then he screamed. And then he came walking back out backwards, slowly, without turning away from whatever he had seen. For years, he would not tell us what happened in that room. It was only much later, when I took over managing the farm, that he finally told me. He said the man had moved into the corner of the room, the corner closest to our beds. Then, with his back pressed against the wall, his body began twisting into shapes that no person should be able to make. My grandfather said it was not like someone bending or stretching. It was wrong. After that, the man rose upward against the wall, still staring at him the entire time. And my grandfather said the eyes were the worst part. He said they were not really eyes at all. They looked like two pitch-black holes where eyes should have been. The clothes the man wore looked old, too. Not just worn out, but old-fashioned, like something elderly men would have worn when my grandfather himself was a child. We never found any confirmed death on the farm that matched that man. We could not connect him to the housekeeper who had been murdered, or to the previous owner who died in the main bedroom. After that night, everything went quiet for a very long time. Years, actually. The next thing I personally experienced there did not happen until early 2014, and that is a much longer story. But the older I get, and the more I think back on that farm, the more certain I am of one thing. That place is deeply, deeply haunted. I've been meaning to tell this story for years because it still sits in the back of my mind, like one of those memories you can't quite explain. This happened when I was a kid, around the time I still believed in Santa Claus. I was young enough to want to believe with my whole heart, even though by then, I was starting to hear other kids say Santa wasn't real. At that age, I had this big fascination with Eastern European culture, especially Russian culture. I don't even know exactly where it started. Maybe it was movies, maybe video games, maybe just the sound of the language itself. But something about the music, the writing, the history, and the way Russian sounded really caught my attention. So for months before Christmas, I had been trying to teach myself little bits of Russian. I was learning the alphabet, practicing phrases, and copying words down in a notebook. Nothing too advanced, obviously. I was still a kid. But I was really proud of it. And because I still believed Santa traveled all over the world, I thought, well, he must know every language, right? He visits kids in every country. He has to know about every place, every culture, every kind of family. So on Christmas Eve, I decided to write Santa a thank you note in Russian. It wasn't anything complicated, just a short little message saying thank you for the gifts, thank you for bringing happiness every year, and that I hoped he had a good night. I folded it up, wrote "For Santa" on the outside, and left it under the Christmas tree. I didn't think much of it after that. To me, it was just a sweet thing to do. The next morning, it was Christmas Day. My younger brothers and I rushed downstairs like we always did, excited to see what Santa had left. The tree looked beautiful. There were presents everywhere, and my parents were sitting there smiling while we tore into the wrapping paper. It was a normal Christmas morning. Warm, loud, messy, and happy. After we finished opening everything, we started cleaning up the crumpled wrapping paper from the floor. That's when I noticed my folded note still sitting under the tree. I picked it up and opened it. And there was writing on it. Someone had written back to me in Russian. The handwriting was neat, not childish, not rushed. It looked like an adult had written it. The message said, "Ho ho ho, большое спасибо," which means, "Ho ho ho, thank you very much." I remember getting this huge burst of excitement in my chest. I ran over to my family and said something like, "Look, Santa wrote back." At that moment, I really believed it. I thought, that's it. Santa has to be real. He answered me in Russian. But as I got older, that memory started to feel stranger and stranger. Not too long after that Christmas, my parents eventually admitted that Santa wasn't real. They told me they had been the ones buying the gifts, eating the cookies, drinking the milk, and setting everything up. So I asked them about the note. I said, "Then who wrote the message back to me?" And they looked genuinely confused. They told me they had no idea. The thing is, when I had shown them the note that Christmas morning, they didn't even know what language it was. I remember them pausing and asking, "What is that?" And I told them it was Russian. My family is Hispanic, and at that time my parents barely knew English, let alone Russian. They didn't know anything about Russian culture, and honestly, they weren't interested in it. Their only real idea of Russia came from old Cold War-era fears and things they had heard growing up. So the idea that either of them somehow wrote a clean Russian response in neat handwriting just does not make sense. My little brothers couldn't have done it either. One of them was still a toddler, and the other was a young kid with no phone, no real internet access, and definitely no reason or ability to write in Russian. Years later, I asked them too, and they both said they had no clue what I was talking about. There was nobody else in the house that night. We didn't live near close relatives or friends who could have come over and done it. And even if someone had somehow helped, I still don't understand how they would have known what I wrote, or that they needed to answer in Russian. That note was just under the tree, and by morning, it had a reply. I'm an adult now, and I know how Christmas works. I know the gifts were from my parents. I know the cookies and milk were part of the tradition. But that one thing has never made sense to me. Someone, or something, wrote back. And honestly, I'm not sure I want to know who it was. When I was a teenager, my mom and I had to leave Montana and move back closer to our family. It happened fast. She had separated from my stepdad for personal reasons, and there really wasn't enough time for her to find us a proper place to stay. Thankfully, my dad let her take the camper so we'd have somewhere to sleep. We packed that thing as full as we could, and he told us that once we got settled somewhere, he'd bring the rest of our stuff. At first, my mom found a little RV spot back home while she looked for a house and tried to get work lined up. But that fell through. So her brother, Uncle Darren, told her we could park the camper beside his house while she got back on her feet. His sister, my Aunt Marla, was staying there too with her kids because their house had flooded. So for a while, it was my mom, me, my aunt, and my cousins all there together. Uncle Darren wasn't around much because he drove trucks for work and was gone constantly. My mom and I were technically outside in the camper though, and honestly, I think that might have been the only reason I lasted there as long as I did. Little by little, I started hearing stories about the house. It was a one-story place, but it had a basement with 2 rooms downstairs. My cousins used to sleep down there, but my aunt had moved them back upstairs. I never got the full reason why, but I could tell nobody liked talking about it too much. Aunt Marla told me strange things happened in that house. Her phone assistant would activate by itself at odd hours and say things that didn't make sense. She tried to laugh it off, saying her phone hated her, but she didn't look like she thought it was funny. Her husband had nightmares about a woman standing over the bed, just staring down at them. My cousins had their own stories too. Eventually, Aunt Marla and the kids moved back home after their house was fixed. After that, it was just me and my mom there. And that's when things really started happening to me. At first, it was small enough that I could explain it away, or at least I tried to. Sometimes I'd nap on the couch inside the house, and when I woke up, something would be sitting near me that hadn't been there before. One time, I woke up with a black hat lying right on my chest. I didn't own a black hat. I didn't remember seeing it anywhere before I fell asleep. Still, I told myself maybe I missed it somehow. Maybe someone had left it there. Maybe. My mom also started hearing tapping on the outside of the camper at night, and sometimes she heard noises coming from the woodshed behind us. That woodshed matters. I didn't know how much at the time, but I would. The part that bothered me most was the bathroom inside the house. I hated it. I know that sounds dramatic, but I mean it. I hated being in there. Our camper didn't have water hookups, so if I needed to shower or use the bathroom, I had to go inside. Every time I stepped into that room, I felt like something was wrong. Not I'm scared of the dark wrong. More like the air itself was waiting for me to notice it. I used to beg my mom to sit outside the bathroom while I showered. Sometimes I even asked her to sit in there, just so I wouldn't be alone. She always said no. So I brought the cat. I'm not proud of that, but at the time, it made sense to me. I thought if the cat was in there, at least I wasn't by myself. And if something happened, maybe the cat would react first. But every single time, except once, the cat disappeared from the bathroom. I don't mean it slipped behind something. I mean I would lock the door, get in the shower, and when I got out, the cat would be gone. Then I'd open the door and find it sitting outside in the hallway. That door clicked shut properly. It wasn't loose. There weren't holes or gaps anywhere big enough for a cat to crawl through. And I always locked it before I got in the shower. So for the cat to get out, the door would have had to unlock, open, let the cat out, close again, and lock behind it. After it happened for the fourth time, I refused to use that bathroom anymore. I refused to go inside the house unless I absolutely had to. I made such a big deal out of it that my mom finally let me shower at the community center instead. The last thing that happened there was the worst. My mom had finally found us a house, and we were packing up the camper to leave. We were making sure nothing would slide around while she drove, and she handed me a plastic-wrapped case of water bottles. She told me to put it inside the house because she didn't want to take it with us. I hadn't stepped foot in that house since the bathroom incidents. I didn't want to go in then either. So I opened the front door, leaned in, set the water down just inside, and slid it to the side. I never fully entered the house. When I looked up to close the door, the bathroom light turned on. At first, I tried to make sense of it. I thought maybe the switch had been halfway down and finally clicked on by itself. Then I heard things being thrown. I couldn't see directly into the bathroom from where I was, but I heard stuff hitting the floor. Things from the counter, maybe bottles or small objects. Then it sounded like someone, or something, was throwing itself around in there. I froze. And then came the scream. I don't know how to describe it in a way that does it justice. It didn't sound human. It was low and high at the same time, loud enough that my whole body locked up. It was pure panic poured into a sound. I slammed the door shut and ran to my mom, crying and yelling that someone was inside the house. My mom didn't ask questions. She told me to get in the truck. Then she yelled for me to get in and leave it alone. As we were pulling away, she looked shaken. Then she told me she had seen Uncle Darren's wife standing in the woodshed. His wife, my aunt, had died by suicide in that woodshed years before. I knew she had passed away, but I didn't know how. I didn't know where. My mom said she saw her waving, almost like she was saying goodbye. I told her what had happened in the bathroom, and after that, we both went quiet for the rest of the drive to our new house. Later, my mom called Uncle Darren and told him what happened. That house still hasn't been sold, as far as I know, and when I looked into the property later, I found out there had been multiple fires there over the years, rebuilds, and more than one suicide connected to the place. I don't know exactly what was in that house, but I know what I heard. And I know that whatever was there waited until the very end to make sure I'd never forget it. I've been noticing something lately in so many people around me, in family, in coworkers, in friends. There's this quiet anxiety running underneath everything. This need to control every detail. This fear of failing. this fear of not being good enough. This feeling that if they loosen their grip even a little, everything might fall apart. And the hardest part is, many people think this is just normal. They think life is supposed to feel heavy. They think being tense all the time means they are being responsible. They think worry is part of being human. But recently, someone I know had an experience that reminded me that it doesn't have to be this way. I'll call her Mina. That's not her real name. She came to me because she was struggling with sleep and anxiety. Her mind was always racing. Her body never really relaxed. Even when nothing was happening, she felt like something was about to go wrong. During the soul journey session I guided her through, her higher self showed her many lifetimes, almost like scenes projected across a huge screen. She was standing there, watching them unfold. Different lives, different problems, different heartbreaks, different fears. And after the session, she said something that stayed with me. She said, "It felt like a video game. You enter the game and forget it's a game. Everything feels so serious. The struggles feel real. The fear feels real. You get completely absorbed in it. But you can also wake up while you're still playing. You can remember that it's only a game, and suddenly, everything becomes lighter. You know you'll get through it. You know it's temporary. You know you're safe." That was the shift. When she saw all those lives from a place of peace, she wasn't trapped inside the drama anymore. She could step back. She could see the patterns. She could understand that the point was not to suffer forever. The point was to grow, to heal, to become resilient, to learn how to let go. Her higher self told her, "Release the fear of failure. Trust the path. Things will unfold the way they are meant to." And when we worked with the fear she had been carrying in her chest, she said it felt like a heavy stone had finally been lifted. Her breathing changed. Her shoulders softened. Her whole body seemed lighter. And honestly, I see this so often. People forget that they are playing the game. They believe the anxiety is the truth. They believe control is the only way to stay safe. They believe the constant worrying is just how life works. But it isn't. It's what happens when we become too lost in the game. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. Sometimes we come here to experience being lost. Sometimes we come here to feel the pressure, the uncertainty, the challenge. But we didn't come here to be crushed by it. We came here to experience. We came here to play. The lesson is this: you are not meant to carry all of that weight forever. The anxiety, the control, the fear of failure. So much of it comes from forgetting who you really are. You are not only the character on the screen. The character has problems. The character has deadlines, relationships, bills, fears, memories, plans, and things they're trying to hold together. But the deeper you, the real you, is the one watching. And when you remember that, even for a moment, life becomes less suffocating. The story is still happening, yes. The challenges may still be there, but they don't own you in the same way. So if this speaks to you, try this meditation. Find a quiet place where you won't be disturbed for about 10 minutes. Sit comfortably, either on a chair or on a cushion. Keep your back straight, but let your body feel natural, not stiff. Close your eyes. Take 3 slow breaths. Inhale through your nose. Exhale gently through your mouth. Let your body settle. Now imagine that you are sitting in a dark movie theater. In front of you is a large blank screen. Slowly, your life begins to appear on that screen. You see your responsibilities, your worries, the situations you keep trying to control, the conversations that replay in your mind, the things that make your chest tighten. Just watch it all like a film. Notice the version of you inside the movie. See how that character reacts. See them worrying, planning, trying to protect themselves. trying to keep everything from falling apart. Don't judge them. Just watch. Now gently shift your attention to where you are sitting. Feel the seat beneath you. Feel the air around you. Feel your breath moving in and out. And notice this. You are not the character on the screen. The character may be afraid, but you, sitting here in the theater, are safe. There is no danger in this seat. There is only awareness. Now imagine that behind your seat there is a door. Stand up, turn around, and open it. Step through. On the other side is a peaceful place made just for you. Maybe it is a quiet beach at sunrise. Maybe it is a forest clearing. Maybe it is a mountain path under a wide sky. Let it appear in whatever way feels natural. This is the place of the player, the one who holds the controller, the one who chose this level, the one who existed before the story began. In this place, feel how light your body becomes. No worries can reach you here. No fear needs to follow you here. This is the part of you that was never broken, never trapped, never truly in danger. Now look back through the doorway. You can still see the theater. You can still see the screen. The film is still playing. But now you remember. It is a film. It is a game. It is an experience. Stay in this peaceful place for a few minutes. Breathe there. Rest there. Let your nervous system remember what safety feels like. And know that you can return to this place anytime. When you're ready, take one deep breath. Slowly open your eyes. Move your fingers and toes. Drink a little water if you can. Try doing this meditation before sleep each night for 2 weeks. At first, it may feel unusual. Your mind might resist it. That's okay. After a few days, you may notice that anxiety doesn't grip you quite as tightly. After 2 weeks, you might catch yourself smiling at something that used to make you panic. Not because the game disappeared, but because you remembered who you are. You are the player, not only the character, and the player doesn't really lose the game. The player experiences it. I hope this helps. Take care. About a week ago, I shared something about what I thought might be a mimic in my house, or maybe something attached to the land itself. Well, last night, it came back. And this time, it moved through the house like it wanted me to know it had heard me talking about it. It was 3:17 in the morning when I woke up to this scratching sound. Not loud exactly, but sharp enough to pull me straight out of sleep. A second later, I heard what sounded like my little girl's bedroom door opening, then closing. The problem was, my daughter wasn't home that night. She was staying elsewhere, so there was no reason for that door to move. I lay there for a few seconds, just listening. At first, I tried to convince myself it was one of the cats messing around in the hallway. They do that sometimes. But when I slowly lifted the blanket and looked around, every single cat was either stretched across me or curled up against my husband. The dog was on the floor, wide awake, staring at the open bedroom door. And the house was quiet. Too quiet. This place is never completely silent. There's always something. A pipe ticking, the fridge humming, the roof settling, an animal shifting around. But right then, it felt like the whole house was holding its breath with me. Then I heard it. 2 slow footsteps in the hallway. But they didn't sound like normal footsteps. They sounded dry and rough, almost like sandpaper dragging against painted walls. I stayed perfectly still and kept my eyes locked on the doorway. Then came 2 more steps. And then something flew into the room. It was one of my daughter's stuffed toys. It came from her bedroom and landed right near the dog. My dog panicked and jumped onto the bed, which scared the cats and nearly knocked the breath out of me. And I remember thinking, very clearly, that I had just watched a stuffed animal fly into my bedroom by itself. All the animals went completely still after that. Every one of them was staring at the same spot, the top left corner of my bedroom doorway. So I looked, and that's when I saw it. There was this black shape peering down from near the ceiling, the same dark mass that used to bother me years ago when my daughter was a baby. It wasn't standing there like a person. It was more like it was hanging or leaning from above, watching us from the corner where the wall met the ceiling. I went cold all over. For a few seconds, I honestly couldn't tell if I was awake or trapped in sleep paralysis. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stare back at it. Then my dog, who is a cane corso and pit mix, launched off the bed and jumped at it, snapping into the air like he was trying to bite whatever that thing was. And the black mass just vanished. Not moved. Not backed away. It evaporated. The second I heard my dog hit the floor, I knew I was awake. I had been awake the whole time. After that, something started running across the metal roof. Something heavy. It sounded like a large animal with 4 legs sprinting back and forth above the house. It kept going until about 3:50, and then everything stopped all at once. The next morning, I kept thinking about the work I'd been doing near the tree line. I'd been clearing out invasive vines and brush from the edge of the property, and now I can't stop wondering if I disturbed something out there. Like I pulled on the wrong route, or crossed some boundary I didn't know existed. I don't think this is a mimic anymore. I don't know what it is. I have told it to leave. I have cleansed the house with frankincense, myrrh, yerba santa, benzoin, and sage. I've had ordained ministers pray over the home and bless it. But I don't feel like this thing responds to that kind of authority. Honestly, religious prayers don't seem to weaken it. If anything, they make it more active. That's what scares me. It feels completely inhuman, older than anything I know how to name. And it doesn't just make noise. When my husband is away for work, it touches me at night. It has sat on the bed beside me. It has played with my hair. It has thrown pots and pans from the dish rack and knocked things off the stove. I wake up feeling drained, like something has pulled the life out of me while I slept. When I'm home, I get headaches and nausea. But when I leave the property, I start feeling normal again. The previous owner died here more than 20 years ago, though I haven't been able to find out how. I also learned that my property used to be part of a much larger plantation before the land was divided up. So trying to trace what may have happened on these 4 acres feels almost impossible. I'm working on getting cameras set up because I need proof. My family has experienced this too, but for some reason, I seem to get the most attention from it. And moving is not an option. So I'm asking plainly now, what do you think this thing is? And how do I make it stop? I want to tell you about something that happened to my sister-in-law, and honestly, even now, thinking about it gives me that cold little pinch at the back of my neck. At the time, my brother, his wife, and their 3-year-old son were looking for a place to live. Money was tight, the economy wasn't great, and then they found this big old house with rent so low it almost felt like a mistake. You know that kind of price where you feel lucky for about 5 seconds, and then some quieter part of your brain starts whispering, why is it so cheap? The house looks strange from the outside. Not falling apart strange exactly, more like awkward. There was this narrow staircase on the right side of the front entrance, leading up to a front door that sat higher than ground level. It gave the whole place an odd, lifted feeling, as though the house didn't quite want to touch the earth. But nothing was officially wrong with it. The agent never mentioned any unnatural death there, and on paper, it seemed fine. So they moved in. My brother, his wife Lena, and their little boy Noah. Now, Noah was usually the kind of kid who loved exploring a new place. Open a cupboard, peek behind curtains, run from room to room like he'd discovered a private kingdom. But in that house, he changed almost immediately. He didn't want to explore. He didn't want to be alone. He clung to Lena constantly. If she stepped out of his sight for even a few seconds, he would panic and cry. Not a normal whiny cry either. It was fear. Real fear. At first, Lena thought maybe he just needed time to adjust. New house, new room, different sounds, that sort of thing. Then one day, she was walking through the house, with Noah right behind her as usual. As she passed one of the bedrooms, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. A large chandelier hanging from the ceiling. She stopped and turned to look properly. There was no chandelier, just a plain light bulb. She told herself it was nothing. Maybe her eyes had played a trick on her. Maybe the light shifted. Maybe she was tired. But after that, the house began to feel different, especially the kitchen. Whenever Lena was in there, she had this powerful feeling that someone was watching her. Not a vague feeling, not imagination. It was so strong that some days she would grab Noah, leave the house, and sit in the car for a while. Other times, she would take him to the mall, just so they didn't have to stay inside. Then came the night with the bedroom light. Lena was getting ready to go out with some friends. She was sitting in the bedroom, doing her makeup. The light switch was one of those old-fashioned round knobs, the kind you twist to adjust the brightness. Turn it one way and the room gets brighter. Turn it all the way back and the light shuts off. As she was putting on makeup, she noticed the room getting dimmer. At first, she thought, old house, old wiring, nothing too unusual. But then the light went completely off. She went over to the switch and saw that the knob had been turned all the way to the off position. That was when she started feeling uneasy. Still, she turned it back on. All the way up. Brightest setting. She sat down again. And slowly, the light began to dim. Dimmer. Dimmer. Then off. This time, she was looking toward the switch, and she saw the knob turn by itself. Slowly. All the way back to off. And then, in the corner of her vision, she saw a black shape sitting on a stool in the bathroom. It looked like a man. Not a clear man. Not a person with features. More like a shadow wearing the idea of a body. She didn't wait around to make sense of it. She got out of that house. Now, my brother believed in ghosts, which somehow makes what he did next even more ridiculous. Because when Lena told him everything, he basically did nothing. Truly heroic stuff. Husband of the haunted year. But that changed one night when he came home late from work. Lena was asleep in their bedroom. The bathroom door inside the bedroom had been left open. At some point, she woke up to a strange sound. Tap, tap, tap. Like a cane hitting the floor. She opened her eyes. In the darkness, she saw the same black figure slowly moving toward the bed. She knew she was awake. She was completely sure of it. This wasn't a dream dissolving at the edges. This was happening. Lena grew up Catholic, so she pulled the blanket over herself from head to toe and started praying. She began with, Our Father. And right beside her left ear, she heard a deep man's voice. It repeated the words after her, mocking her, softly teasing, Our Father. Then giggling. She kept praying. She was terrified, but she kept going, while that voice stayed right beside her head, repeating, laughing, breathing close enough that it felt almost physical. Then the bedroom light switched on. My brother had just come home. After that, they moved out. And from what I heard, nobody ever stayed in that house for more than 6 months. Later, Noah said something I still don't like thinking about. He told us he had seen 16 faces in that house. When we asked him what he meant, he just started crying and said he didn't want to talk about it. 2 years later, he didn't remember any of it. The house was eventually torn down. I still wonder about that sometimes. If something really was there, where did it go when the walls came down? Did it leave? Did it follow someone? Did it simply wait, with nowhere to sit and nowhere to haunt? The rumor was that the previous owner had been an old man who lived alone and died naturally in the house. And one more thing still bothers me. If that thing mocked Lena while she prayed, then what does that mean? Did the prayer protect her? Or did it only make him laugh? Today something happened that honestly shook me. My husband, my father-in-law, and I were driving back from a little day trip, and on the way home, we were planning to stop by the hospital to visit my mother-in-law. She's been staying there for treatment. We ended up getting back much earlier than we thought we would, so we considered going home first, resting for a bit, and then heading to the hospital later. But I had this really strong feeling that we should just go straight there. I can't fully explain it. It wasn't dramatic or anything, just this deep inner push, like, no, we need to go now. So we went. When we pulled into the hospital parking area, my husband was looking for a spot, and suddenly he glanced up toward the building. His whole face changed. I was sitting in the back seat, and I could see that he looked unsettled. Then he said, "That woman in the window looks exactly like your mom." So I looked up, and I froze. There was a woman standing at a fourth-floor hospital window, looking straight down at us. And I mean straight at us. Not casually looking outside. Not just staring into space. She was watching us. And she looked exactly like my mother. The strange part is, to me, she looked like my mom from maybe 10 or 12 years ago. But to my husband, she looked like my mom now. Either way, it was close enough that my whole body reacted before my brain could even catch up. It made absolutely no sense. My mother is in the United States. We were in Portugal. She has mobility issues and definitely could not just hop on an international flight and appear in a hospital window overseas. Rationally, I knew it could not be her. But visually, emotionally, instinctively, it felt like her. After we parked and got out, we had to walk a few minutes from the car to the hospital entrance. And that entire time, this woman kept watching us from the window. I kept looking back up because I couldn't help myself. Every time I did, she was still there. I had chills everywhere. I kept telling my husband, "This is really freaking me out." And what made it even stranger was that she didn't just look like my mom. Her posture, the way she held herself, the way she stared, even the stillness of her face, it all felt painfully familiar. My husband noticed it too. We both agreed that her mannerisms were almost identical. Once we got upstairs to my mother-in-law's room, I tried to settle myself, but I could not stop thinking about it. It kept replaying in my mind. That window, her face, the way she watched us walk in. Eventually, I told my husband, "I need to go to that floor. I need to walk past that room and see her closer up." He said he would come with me. So we went to the fourth floor and found the area where her room should have been. But right above that section of the unit, there was this huge sign hanging from the ceiling that said, "Authorized personnel only." We couldn't go in. It felt like we were being blocked from getting any closer, which only made the whole thing feel even more unreal. I should probably add that I've been going through a very deep spiritual awakening lately. My view of reality has been changing a lot, and I've been opening up to ideas I never would have taken seriously before. One of those ideas is that this life might be some kind of Earth School simulation, a place where we come to learn, evolve, and remember who we really are. So part of me wonders if my higher self created that moment somehow. Maybe it was a confirmation. Maybe it was meant to show me that what I've been feeling and learning is real, that reality is far more layered than we usually allow ourselves to believe. But another part of me wonders if it was something else entirely. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I saw another version of my mother living a completely different life. Maybe somehow she recognized us too, and that's why she was staring so intensely. I don't know. And the wildest part is that the night before this happened, I saw what I believe was a UAP for the first time in my life. So having these two experiences back to back has left me feeling completely stunned. I keep trying to make sense of it. My logical mind still wants to doubt it a little and say, maybe I imagined the resemblance. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe my brain filled in the blanks. But deep down, I know what I saw. I saw a woman in that window who looked like my mother, moved like my mother, and watched us like she knew us. And I honestly don't know what to do with that. I still get uneasy when I think about this. Even though it happened years ago, and I've mostly moved on from it. It's strange how something can be so far in the past and still feel close enough to breathe on the back of your neck. I was around 14 when it started. I'm 24 now, so a lot of time has passed, but back then, it felt like my whole world had quietly tilted sideways. One afternoon, I went with my cousins to visit an old royal estate outside our town. It was huge. The kind of place that looks beautiful in daylight, but probably shouldn't be explored after sunset. There were wide courtyards, cracked stone paths, faded walls, and gardens that looked like they were holding on to secrets. We were just being kids, running around, laughing too loudly, chasing each other through the passageways. To get from one part of the palace grounds to another, we had to cross this garden area where old graves were lined up. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was young, distracted, and honestly not very careful. Then one of my cousins, Karan, shoved me as a joke. I stumbled, tried to catch myself, and my foot landed directly on one of the graves. At first, I just stepped away and kept walking. I didn't say anything. Nobody did. It didn't feel important in that moment. But after that day, things slowly began to change. It started small. Little sounds at night. Footsteps outside my room. The floor creaking when everyone else was asleep. Nothing dramatic enough to make people believe me, but just enough to make me feel like I wasn't alone. Then it got worse. I started waking up around midnight almost every night. Not from a dream, not from a noise, just suddenly wide awake. I would lie there in the dark, trying to force myself back to sleep, but I couldn't. And then I'd hear it. Footsteps. Clear, slow footsteps circling my room. They would move around me, stop near my bed, then start again. Sometimes they came so close that I could feel this heavy presence beside me, like someone was standing there, leaning over me, watching. And whenever I sat up, everything stopped. The room would go silent. But the moment I lay back down, the footsteps would rush away, almost like whatever it was didn't want to be seen. After a while, I started noticing other things too. I had a small pendant I used to wear, and it kept breaking. I would get it fixed, wear it again, and somehow it would break again. I couldn't focus in school because I was exhausted all the time. I was sleepy during the day, nervous at night, and constantly on edge. Then I began seeing shadows. Not full figures at first, just movement in the corner of my eye. A shape passing behind a doorway. Something dark standing near a wall, gone the second I looked directly at it. The worst part was the feeling. That feeling of being watched. I tried telling my family, but most of them thought I was making excuses because I didn't want to study. I don't blame them completely. I know how it sounded. But I wasn't pretending. Sometimes I could feel something so close to me that it almost felt like someone was breathing near my face. Eventually, I told my mother and grandmother everything. I even told them about stepping on the grave at the palace. That was when they finally got quiet. My grandmother took it seriously right away. She said some things should never be laughed off, especially when old places and graves are involved. So they took me to a priest. He listened carefully and said that sometimes spirits can feel disrespected by careless actions. He also said something that stayed with me. He told us that if the spirit had truly wanted to harm me, it probably would have done so already. He believed it wasn't trying to destroy me. It was trying to make itself known. Maybe it wanted acknowledgement. Maybe it wanted closure. He prayed for me and gave me a protective necklace to wear. I thought that would make everything better, but somehow it made things clearer. After I started wearing the necklace, I began seeing the figure more often. A dark, shadowy shape. It never stood right in front of me. It stayed at the edges of my sight, near corners, doorways, and dim places. I would turn my head and it would be gone, but I always knew it had been there. Then, one evening, everything changed. There was a big festival happening in our area. My grandmother always used to say that spirits don't like bright, happy energy. They avoid celebrations, prayers, music, lights, all of it. I never knew whether I believed that, but that night made me wonder. I was home alone, sitting in my room, trying to relax. The house felt quieter than usual, but not in a peaceful way. Then I looked toward the main room and saw it. A figure sitting on the sofa. Just sitting there. Dark, still, and shaped almost like a person. For a few seconds I couldn't move. My body went cold. Then somehow I gathered enough courage to stand up and walk toward it. The moment I stepped closer, it vanished. But then I saw it again, moving fast toward the front door. I don't know what came over me, but I ran after it. I reached the door, opened it, and saw the shadow rushing down the stairs. And then it disappeared. Just like that. After that night, the footsteps stopped. The broken pendant stopped. The shadows stopped. I could sleep again. Everything became normal. I don't know exactly what followed me home from that palace. I don't know if it was angry, confused, or just waiting for me to understand what I had done. But I know what I felt, and I know how badly it affected me at the time. It might not sound like the most terrifying story in the world, but living through it was different. It scared me deeply. And in a strange way, it also taught me something. Fear becomes heavier when you keep running from it. That night, when I finally walked toward the thing I had been avoiding, it left. Maybe that was all it wanted. Maybe it just wanted me to face it. There are a few parts to this story, so stay with me. Back in 2020, I was in this season where I was really trying to heal. I was practicing mindfulness every day, meditating, doing breath work, spending a lot of time outside, just trying to come back to myself in some way. One afternoon, I was sitting on my back porch in the sunlight, just being quiet, when I noticed a dragonfly nearby. Now, I'm a pretty skeptical person by nature. My brain usually wants evidence before it believes anything. But for some reason, in that moment, I thought, what would happen if I stopped being so closed off for a minute? What if I just allowed myself to be open? So I closed my eyes, took a few slow breaths, and pictured the dragonfly landing on my knee. And then it did. I opened my eyes, and there it was, sitting right on my knee. So then I thought, okay, what if I imagine it landing on my finger? And it did. At that point, I was already stunned. Then I pictured it landing on my foot, and it went there too. Then back to my knee, and again, it followed. It happened too many times for me to brush it off as coincidence. I remember sitting there thinking, something strange is happening right now. I didn't know what to call it. Spiritual, paranormal, intuitive, whatever word fits, but I knew it felt real. Fast forward to September of 2023. My grandmother was at home on hospice. A couple of days before she passed, she was in this half-asleep, half-unreachable state. One night, while she was resting, I sat beside her and held her hand. I closed my eyes and quietly hoped for something. A message, a feeling, a connection, anything. I think part of me believed that because she was so close to passing, maybe there would be some kind of opening. Some little doorway between here and wherever we go. But nothing happened. Or at least, that's what I thought. Then, about a month ago, I stayed up late talking with my cousin Mara, who I don't speak with very often. She asked me if anything unusual had happened in the house since my grandmother died. Anything paranormal, any signs, any strange little moments. I told her no, and honestly, I admitted I was disappointed. When I was little, I used to ask my grandmother to visit me after she passed. I wanted so badly to believe she would. Mara said something that stayed with me. She said maybe time doesn't work the same way on the other side. Maybe we have no idea how or when they're able to send a message, and maybe sometimes we're not in the right state to receive it yet. That really stuck with me. The past few weeks, I've been back in another healing season. I've been trying to climb out of depression, anxiety, insomnia, all of it. I started meditating again. I had Reiki done for the first time. I made some big decisions that felt scary but necessary. The kind of choices that clear space in your life even if they hurt at first. Then, 2 nights ago, I was listening to music on my laptop, which I almost never do. A song came up that I hadn't heard in a long time. 4th of July by Sufjan Stevens. The song is written like a conversation between someone who has died and someone who is still alive. I started really listening, then reading the lyrics as they played. And then I got to the line, "Do you find it all right, my dragonfly?" The second I read the words, "my dragonfly," something in me broke open. It wasn't gentle, it was instant. It felt like every emotion in my body rushed to the surface at once. I started crying so hard I almost felt sick. In that moment, my mind connected the dragonfly from 2020 to my grandmother. Maybe it was her. Maybe she sent it. Maybe it was some kind of sign before I even understood what it meant. And then the next lines felt like they were being spoken directly to me. Why do you cry? Make the most of your life, while it is rife, while it is light. That hit me so deeply because I haven't been in a good place for a long time. I felt like I wasted parts of my life, especially the last years of my 20s. I've carried so much grief and regret, and suddenly it felt like she was telling me, "Live, please live." After that, I went to get a framed photo of my grandmother so I could put it on my bedside table. But I got sidetracked and opened her jewelry box. The first thing I pulled out was a charm bracelet. On it was an engraving from my grandfather that said, "To our eternal love." I know logically that it was from him to her. But in that moment, it felt like she was speaking through it too. Like love doesn't end. Like it just changes form. And maybe this sounds strange, I know it might, but I keep thinking about what Mara said, that time could be different on the other side, that we don't know how messages move, that maybe we have to be ready to receive them. And I wonder if that night, when I held my grandmother's hand while she was close to death, somehow created a bridge. Maybe not in a way I can explain. Maybe that quiet moment connected back to the day with the dragonfly. Maybe what I thought was nothing wasn't nothing at all. My logical brain keeps arguing with the part of me that believes. It says, it's just a song, it's just lyrics. Lots of people feel things when they hear that song. And I get that. But the dragonfly really happened. I didn't imagine that part. It moved to every place I pictured before it even left the last one. It went on too long to feel random. I've had other moments in my life too, where I just knew something before it happened. A calm would come over me, then the thing would unfold. Sometimes I feel deeply tuned into nature, almost like there's a quiet language there that I can almost understand. I don't know exactly what this was, but I know how it felt. And it felt like love finding a way through. This happened to me when I was about 13, back when we lived in this old house in a tiny mountain village. It was just my mom, my little brother, and me. We lived on the upper floor, and the owner of the house lived downstairs. Our apartment had a really strange layout. There was this long hallway, and at the end of it was the kitchen. Then, to get to my room, you had to walk through the kitchen. And to get to my mom's room, you had to walk through my room first. So her bedroom was kind of tucked away at the very end of everything. And honestly, I never liked that room. I can't explain it properly, even now. Nothing obvious ever happened at first, but every time I had to go near it, I felt uncomfortable. Heavy, almost, like the air changed a little. I used to keep her bedroom door shut whenever I could, because I hated seeing inside. We also had a cat, and he was always wandering around the apartment or going outside. So strange little noises weren't unusual. One summer afternoon, I was sitting in my bedroom by the open window. There was a wide windowsill, and I used to sit there all the time to get some fresh air and talk to people outside. My mom was down in the courtyard watching my little brother play near the garage. The door to my mom's room was closed, like usual. It had one of those old round doorknobs, the kind you see on older doors. I was just sitting there, relaxed, looking outside and chatting a little, when suddenly I heard this loud rattling sound behind me. I turned around, and my whole body froze. The doorknob to my mom's bedroom was shaking. Not turning exactly, just shaking hard, like someone on the other side had grabbed it and was trying to open the door. At first, I tried to stay calm. I thought maybe I'd accidentally shut the cat in there. That made sense for about 2 seconds. Then I looked back out the window, and I saw our cat outside, near the garage, walking close to my little brother. That's when my heart just dropped, because everyone who lived in that apartment was outside. My mom was outside, my brother was outside, the cat was outside, and I was the only one upstairs. But that doorknob was still moving. I didn't even think. I just ran. I bolted out of my room, through the kitchen, down the stairs, and into the courtyard, crying and shaking. I told my mom what had happened, probably barely making sense because I was so scared. My mom has always been very practical, so she stayed calm. She told me there was probably nothing there, and she went upstairs to check, mostly to reassure me. She opened the door. There was nothing in the room. No person, no animal, nothing fallen against the door. Nothing that could have moved the handle like that. And I know people can say maybe I imagined it, or maybe it was the wind, or an old house making old house noises. But I know what I saw. That handle was being shaken from the other side. Other strange things happened in that apartment after that too, but that moment stayed with me the most. Even now, years later, when I think about that bedroom at the end of the apartment, I still feel that same little wave of fear come back. Like some part of me is still sitting on that windowsill, hearing the doorknob rattle behind me. Hey, so I wanted to share something that happened during a long weekend trip near Lake Leelanau, because honestly, I'm still trying to understand it. I went there with my partner, Milo, and it was my first time in the area. I had been looking forward to it for weeks. We rented this quiet little one-level place up on a hill, just above North Lake Leelanau Drive. No basement, no attic, nothing that made the place seem unusual at first. It was close enough to the road that we could see it, but during the whole stay, I barely heard any traffic. Maybe a few cars total. The property felt private, secluded, but not unsafe. At least, not at first. When we walked in, the first thing I noticed was how still it was. Not peaceful exactly, more like emptied out. The air felt too quiet. I remember feeling a little off balance, almost foggy, but I told myself it was probably just the drive. That first evening, we heard a few small sounds inside the unit. Little knocks here and there, maybe something shifting. Nothing dramatic enough to make us pack up or start investigating. At the time, it felt random. But the first night, after Milo fell asleep, things changed. I started hearing movement inside the rental. Not outside, inside. Objects shifting, bare feet brushing across the floor. It sounded like someone was moving around casually, especially in the kitchen, like the place was being used by someone who already knew where everything was. And when the sound stopped, that was worse. It felt like someone was standing in the hallway, watching us. Then it felt like they were in the bedroom. Sometimes I had this awful sense that they were moving between the hall and the bathroom, just pacing around us while Milo slept beside me. I was uncomfortable in a way I can't really dress up. I felt genuinely scared. The next morning, while I was showering, I heard the shuffling again. Clear, barefooted steps. Before we left for breakfast, I checked the windows and doors. The windows were fine, but one of the exit doors was unlocked. I asked Milo right away, "Did you use this door?" They said no, and I knew I had locked it the night before. When we came back, we spent the afternoon and evening in the rental, trying to relax. But the noises continued through the day. Little movements, shuffling. The sense of someone nearby. I kept checking the rooms, the windows, the hallway. I did it enough that Milo noticed and asked me about it. I just felt like I needed to stay alert. Before bed that second night, I checked everything again. The doors, the windows, anything we had opened. Everything was locked. Then Milo fell asleep, and almost immediately, it started again. This time the activity felt stronger, louder, more deliberate. I heard movement in the common areas, but I also felt like someone was walking through the bedroom and stopping near us. At one point, I heard what sounded like two voices having a low conversation. I couldn't make out words, but the rhythm was unmistakable. Two people murmuring somewhere inside the place. I finally got so scared that I turned on lights. I went into the bathroom, switched on the light, partly closed the door, and got back into bed. I turned my phone brightness up, put on a video at low volume, and tried to fall asleep. I had nightmares all night. The next morning, I woke up and found a heavy drawer wide open in the bathroom area. It was granite and hardwood, not some lightweight drawer that could slide open on its own. Milo and I had even talked earlier about how awkward and heavy those drawers were, because the knobs were tiny and smooth. That drawer had not been opened the night before. I know it wasn't, because it would have blocked the way out of the bathroom. Then, while I showered again, I heard the bare feet. But this time, there was another sound too. Heavier footsteps. Slower, more solid, going back and forth. The thing that made my stomach turn was that those heavier steps reminded me of Milo's walk. We had actually joked about that kind of footstep the day before, but I knew it wasn't Milo. The rental had an open layout, and I knew where they were. By then, I felt like something was mimicking us, or playing with us. From that point on, the activity seemed almost constant. Later that day, we went out for a while, came back briefly, and something unexpected happened. I proposed to Milo inside the rental. I know that probably sounds strange after everything I've said, but whenever we left the house, I felt normal again. The fear lifted. The confusion lifted. So when we came back for just a few minutes between outings, I wasn't thinking about the house. I was thinking about us. But when I walked toward the bedroom to get the rings, I suddenly felt deeply disoriented, almost confused. It wasn't nerves. We had been talking about marriage for years. This was not a rushed or uncertain thing. Milo said yes, and for a few moments, I was happy. Then I felt violently ill. Not just nervous or emotional. Sick in that awful way where you wish your body would just get it over with so you could feel relief. We tried to blame it on food, even though we had eaten the same meal. I took medication, but nothing really helped. That sick feeling stayed with me for the rest of the day. That evening, when we got back, I finally told Milo plainly that something felt wrong in the rental. That was when they admitted they had heard things too. Someone going through cabinets. Someone moving through our belongings. Muffled conversations. I hadn't heard the belongings being touched, but they had. After that, we were both on edge. We tried to enjoy the evening, especially because we had just gotten engaged, but we kept looking over our shoulders. Down the hall. Toward the windows. Toward the doors. At one point, we were sitting together, talking about the engagement, trying to feel grateful and excited. And then came the loudest sound of the entire trip. It came from the middle of the unit. It was so sudden and violent that the only way I can describe it is that it sounded like an explosion inside the house. Milo snapped toward the sound and yelled, "There is literally no reason for that." And they were right. There was no reason. No explanation. Nothing had fallen. Nothing made sense. We didn't even really discuss it afterward, because I think neither of us wanted to make it more real than it already was. On the final night, I went around again before bed to lock up and prepare for leaving in the morning. Several windows that we had never used were unlocked. The doors were unlocked too. Then I noticed the dining chairs. They had been pulled farther out from the table than when we arrived. We had never used the dining set. The fear came early that night. I took my medication earlier than usual, left more lights on, and luckily I didn't have to lie awake alone for long after Milo fell asleep. Still, there were noises. The same presence. The same feeling that the place was occupied by something that knew we were there. The final morning was a repeat. Bare feet. Heavy feet. The feeling of being watched. And one exit door open again. As we left the property, I said, "We are never coming back here." Milo agreed. But here's the part that still bothers me. Later, Milo didn't remember the loud, explosive sound clearly. They didn't remember yelling what they yelled afterward. They also downplayed a lot of what happened, even though they had admitted to hearing cabinets, belongings, and muffled voices while we were there. They mostly remembered that I had made it very clear I did not like that house. And the thing is, I'm not someone who scares easily. I grew up in what I'd call a loud house, spiritually speaking. By the time I was 12, I was used to strange sounds and odd feelings. I've been around places and people with heavy energy before. I've had experiences that might unsettle other people, but they never made me feel like this. This was different. I don't know if it was me. I don't know if it was the house. I don't know if it was the land. But I know I did not feel safe there. I didn't feel well. And at certain points, I honestly didn't feel fully sane. So I'm sharing this because I'd really like to know whether anyone familiar with Leland or Lake Leelanau has heard similar stories. Folklore, local history, anything tied to that area. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just trying to understand why that place felt so wrong. I must have been about 15 when this happened. Back when I was living in this little hometown where everybody sort of knew everybody. It had maybe 12,000 people in it, give or take, so news traveled fast, rumors traveled faster, and creepy houses had reputations before you ever stepped inside them. My cousin, who I'll call Brandon, lived close by, and we used to hang around with these kids down the street. There were two sisters, Marissa and Kayla, and their little brother, though, honestly, we mostly spent time with the girls because they were closer to our age. Their house always had this uneasy feeling to it. It was older, kind of worn down, and I remember people saying it had been a drug house before their family moved in. I don't know how true that was, but in a town like that, stories stuck to places like dust. And the girls had mentioned more than once that they thought the house was haunted. One afternoon, Brandon and I were outside when Kayla and Marissa came running over. Kayla, the younger sister, looked genuinely shaken. Not just, I want attention scared, but pale, wide-eyed, trying to talk too fast because her brain was still back in whatever had happened. She told us she'd woken up in the middle of the night. She slept on the bottom bunk, and Marissa slept above her. When Kayla opened her eyes, she said there was a hockey stick floating near her head. Not lying on the bed, not leaning against something. Floating. She said the handle was angled downward and the blade was pointing up, almost like someone was holding it there, ready to swing it. She tried calling Marissa's name, but Marissa wouldn't wake up. So Kayla screamed, and the stick dropped to the floor. After that, she refused to sleep alone in that bunk and ended up squeezing into bed with her sisters. Now, I'll be honest. Brandon and I didn't know whether we believed her. We were teenagers, so part of us wanted to laugh it off, and part of us desperately wanted it to be real. That perfect, spooky little doorway between skepticism and curiosity. So I asked her, "Do you want to show us what happened?" She said yes. And because this was around 2007, when YouTube was still this strange new kingdom of grainy chaos, I ran back and grabbed my family's old camcorder. Brandon and I were joking that if we caught a ghost, we'd be famous. Real professional ghost hunters, obviously. 2 kids, 1 busted camcorder, no plan. We went into their house and headed upstairs to the girls' bedroom. As soon as we got in there, I started recording. I asked Kayla to explain it again, and she picked up the hockey stick to show us exactly where it had been. She stood beside the bottom bunk and held it off to the side near where her head would have been, with the blade tilted upward. We suggested maybe Marissa had held it from the top bunk while she was asleep or half awake. Marissa immediately shook her head and said no. And to be fair, she was known for sleeping like a stone dropped into a lake. Once she was out, she was gone. Then I asked Kayla, "Where was the stick before you saw it?" She grabbed it and slid it under the top bunk mattress, right above where she would have been sleeping. Basically, it had been tucked between the mattress and the bed frame, underneath Marissa. At that point, I started thinking, okay, maybe she woke up confused. Maybe in the dark, half asleep, she saw part of the stick sticking out and thought it was floating. It seemed possible. Kayla got irritated with us and said, "But it fell. I heard it hit the floor." And she had a point. That part didn't fit as neatly. Then Brandon and I noticed this little storage door in the back corner of the room, near the entrance. It was one of those small, awkward doors that already look suspicious just because of where it is. We started joking that the storage room was probably the haunted part. I walked over, opened the little door, and stuck the camcorder into the dark, like some kind of bargain bin paranormal investigator. You couldn't see much. It was just blackness and dust and old house silence. We made some dumb comment about how maybe that was where people had hidden drugs, or maybe someone had overdosed in there years ago. Then I walked back over to the bunk bed and lay down on the bottom bunk with the camcorder still in my hand. We all kept talking for a minute. Nothing dramatic, just that nervous, joking chatter people do when they're trying not to admit they're uncomfortable. Then I looked up at the top bunk. The hockey stick wasn't there anymore. I said, "Wait, where did we put the stick? I thought it was still under the mattress." Everyone stopped. We all looked around the room. Nobody saw it at first. Then someone pointed toward the little storage door. Next to that door, there was a dresser pushed up against the wall. And there, somehow, was the hockey stick wedged behind it. The blade was facing up and sticking out toward the little door, like it had been carefully tucked there. The room went cold in that way that has nothing to do with temperature, because it didn't make sense. If someone had put it there, they would have had to pull it out from under the top bunk mattress, carry it across the room, and shove it behind the dresser. And the way it was positioned was weird. It wasn't just lying there naturally. It was tucked between the dresser and the wall with the hook side out, leaning toward the storage door. So I grabbed the camcorder and rewound the tape. We watched it back right there in the room. There was Kayla talking about the stick. There she was, sliding it under the mattress. Then, just a few seconds later, the video showed me turning toward the little storage door. And as the camera swept past the dresser, you could see it. The hockey stick was already there, wedged behind the dresser, blade up, clear as anything. Nobody said much at first. We just stared at that tiny camcorder screen, trying to make our brains turn the impossible into something ordinary. Brandon finally said something like, "Nope, maybe I moved it and it fell behind there." But even he didn't sound convinced. I told him there was no time. The camera moved toward that corner too fast. Someone would have had to pull the stick out from under the mattress, cross the room, place it behind the dresser, and get out of the shot without making any sound. And that space behind the dresser was so tight that if it had fallen in, it absolutely would have clattered. It didn't. Nobody heard anything, and the video showed it there almost immediately. That was enough for all of us. We suddenly remembered we were still standing in the bedroom where this had just happened, and we ran downstairs and straight out of the house. I never uploaded the video, partly because the camcorder was already old and annoying to deal with, even back then, but mostly because I didn't want my awkward teenage self floating around online forever, attached to some shaky ghost footage. I still think about it though. I can't fully explain it. I've tried. I've gone over the timing, the room, the way the stick was positioned, the sound it should have made, everything. After that day, I hated going upstairs in that house. I could do it, but I never liked it. And those girls were terrified of sleeping in that room again. Honestly, I don't blame them. So, when we first moved into that house, I was still a teenager, and almost right away, strange things started happening. At first, it was knocking from the attic. And I don't mean little scratching sounds or something you could easily explain away as an animal moving around. These were actual knocks. Clear, deliberate knocks. One night, I was sleeping beside my mom, and she woke me up and asked, "Do you hear that?" And right above us, from the attic, there were several knocks in a row. I remember hearing them, but honestly, I was so exhausted that I barely reacted. I just wanted to sleep. Another time, during the day, my little brother and I were lying on my mom's bed, staring up at the ceiling, and from the exact spot I happened to be looking at, there was a knock. He was still pretty young then, so I told him it was just the wind. I didn't want to scare him, but I knew it didn't sound like wind. There were other sounds too. A few times, we heard what sounded like a ball bouncing. It would usually start above us and then move away, like someone was bouncing it across the floor overhead. That always stuck with me because my mom had heard that same kind of sound before, years earlier, in another house we lived in. She was alone in a room, and she heard a ball bouncing in there with her. Eventually, the attic knocks stopped, but other things started happening instead. About once a year, my mom would be away for a week or so, and for some reason, things always seemed to get worse when I was alone in the house. One of the first times she left, on the very first night, I heard 4 loud bangs from the attic. They were strong enough that I woke up, but again, I was so tired that I just fell back asleep. Another year, she was away again, and the first morning I woke up because someone, or something, was knocking hard on my bedroom wall. It was so loud that the mirror hanging on that wall actually shook. I got out of bed because I had friends coming over later and needed to clean up. While I was moving around, I suddenly heard what sounded like a plastic cup tipping over in the hallway. That's the best way I can describe it. A hollow little clatter, like a cup falling onto the floor. But when I checked, there was nothing there. Another morning, I woke up, got ready for work, and then I heard a click, followed by the sound of an old machine turning on. I looked around and realized it was my PlayStation. Someone, or something, had pressed the power button, and it was switching itself on. Then there was another time when I was leaving for work. My mom and brother were both away, so I knew nobody else should have been moving around. As I passed my brother's room, I heard the door handle moving. I saw it from the corner of my eye, going up and down. But the second I turned my head and looked directly at it, it stopped. One night, I woke up because my feet were bouncing. Not twitching. Bouncing. It felt like someone was underneath my bed, pushing up on the mattress from below. There's no real space under that bed for anyone to hide, but I still checked. Then I checked the front door too, just to make sure it was locked. It was. But the scariest thing happened one night when I went to bed around 2 in the morning. Before going to sleep, I had checked on everyone in the house. They were all asleep. My bedroom door was slightly open. It opens into a hallway, and that hallway has another door leading into the rest of the house. We usually kept that hallway door closed because the house got cold easily. There was also a staircase nearby that led up to the attic. The hallway light was on, and I always hear when someone enters that hallway. Always. Especially if my bedroom door is open. But that night, I didn't hear anyone come in. All of a sudden, I heard someone rummaging through the closet right beside my door. It sounded like they were moving through the shoes, shuffling them around, searching for something. At first, my sleepy brain tried to make it normal. I thought, maybe it's the landlord. But then I thought, why would the landlord be inside the house at 2 in the morning, going through our shoes? Then the sound stopped, and right after that, this small standing shelf we had in the hallway started shaking. It wasn't a little wobble. It shook back and forth like someone had grabbed it with both hands and was forcing it to move. I remember thinking, that had better be the biggest rat in the world. And then I got up and slept in my mom's bed, because absolutely not. The strange thing is, I never really felt like whatever was there was angry. It felt more annoyed than anything. I know this sounds strange, but when I think about it, I always picture the color red. I don't know why. It's just there in my mind. Red. It felt like it was trying to get my attention. The last 2 things I remember happening in the house were years ago. One night, I woke up because there were 3 loud knocks on my bedroom door. Again, I would have heard someone enter the hallway, but I hadn't heard a thing. Another time, the door itself shook. And honestly, I think whatever is in that house might even affect my car. but only when I drive away from that house. I don't really know how to explain it properly, but it has something to do with the tachometer, or the engine revving. Basically, the car doesn't do what it's supposed to do whenever I leave my mom's house. Only there. When I stayed at my dad's place, it never happened. When I rented a place for 9 months, it didn't happen once. The car worked perfectly. But now I'm staying at my mom's house again while she's away for the summer. And I've only been here a few days, and it's already started again. The car refuses to rev properly, and I have to stop somewhere, turn it off, and turn it back on again. It's not the way I park. It's not the way I reverse out. I do the same thing everywhere else. A few years ago, I even replaced the part that was supposed to be responsible for it. And for a while, that seemed to fix it. But then, after a few months, the problem came back. Only at that house. So, I don't know what it is, but whatever lives there, or whatever is attached to that place, it really feels like it knows when someone is paying attention. I'm still honestly shaken up talking about this, but I think I need to start from the beginning so it makes sense. Almost 3 years ago, my husband and I moved to a small island in the Pacific for his work. We knew it was temporary because his job moves us around pretty often, but the housing they placed us in was old. I mean, really old. The unit was built sometime around the 1940s or 1950s. Before we moved in, I had seen people in local groups talk about these houses being haunted. There were stories everywhere. Strange sounds, weird feelings, people seeing things. But at the time, we didn't take it too seriously. We figured every old military-style house probably had stories attached to it. And since we were only going to be here for a few years, we weren't too worried. About 6 months after moving in, something happened that I still think about. That night, we had already put our little one to bed. Usually, bedtime was around 7:30 or 8, and after that, my husband and I would sit in the living room, watch a show, play a game, or just talk until around 10 or 11. We were on the couch that night, talking about whatever series we were watching at the time, when suddenly we heard this loud stomping sound right outside our child's bedroom. And then there was laughter. It sounded like a child laughing, but not exactly. That's the part that made my skin prickle. It started off deeper than a child's laugh should be, and then it sort of shifted into something higher, like the laugh of a young kid, maybe around 5 or 6 years old. It didn't sound natural. It sounded like something trying to copy a child. I jumped up right away and went to check on our little one, thinking maybe they had woken up or made some noise in their sleep. But they were completely knocked out. Not stirring, not moving, nothing. My husband heard it too, but he tried to explain it away. He said maybe one of the toys had gone off. I remember looking at him like, what toy stomps? Still, I didn't argue. I just felt this heavy, uneasy feeling settle in my stomach. The next day, I went through our child's entire room. I checked every toy, every stuffed animal, every little thing that made noise. Nothing fit. There was no TV in there, no tablet, no sound machine, nothing except the ceiling fan we used for background noise. I told my husband, and he said I was probably overthinking it, so I let it go. Or at least, I tried to. About a year later, our child started saying they didn't want to sleep alone anymore. At first, I thought it was just a normal kid phase. Nightmares, monsters, shadows in the room, all of that. They would say there were monsters, and I would reassure them the way parents do. I told them they were safe. I told them nothing could hurt them. I told them that even if a monster tried, it would have to get through me and their dad first. After a while, they seemed less afraid, and I thought maybe we had gotten through that stage. Then one morning at breakfast, completely out of nowhere, they said something that made me freeze. They said, "The monsters are just friends. They won't hurt us because they're always with us. I tried to stay calm, but I asked what they meant, and they said, they're with us when we're all home together. They watch us while we sleep so we're safe. I looked over at my husband, hoping he would react, but he just shrugged it off like it was imagination. And honestly, I wanted to believe that too. At least our child wasn't scared anymore, right? That's what I told myself. But then this past weekend happened. My husband got called into work around 9 at night, and our child was already asleep. I stayed up for a while finishing a painting I had started earlier that day. Sometime later, our little one woke up and wanted to sleep in my bed. I didn't mind. My husband wouldn't be home until morning anyway, so we got settled in my room. They curled up beside me and fell asleep pretty quickly. Then, at around 11:30, I woke up to laughter. It was coming from their bedroom. At first, it sounded like hysterical child laughter. Not a soft giggle, not a toy sound, but loud, wild laughing. Then it changed into what sounded like a child talking, except the words weren't words. It was gibberish, but fast, like someone whispering and babbling at the same time. My child sat straight up next to me and said, "Mama, who is that?" And that's when I knew I wasn't imagining it. There were no TVs on, no toys that could make that sound, no tablets, no game consoles, nothing. The only device on was my phone, and it was in my hand. I didn't know what else to do. I got up, walked to my bedroom door, locked it, and came back to bed. I just sat there for a while, completely stunned, trying to make sure my child felt safe enough to fall asleep again. The thing is, this house has always felt wrong. I've had people come over and ask if I've ever experienced anything strange here before I even tell them anything. It's like the air changes when you walk inside. No matter what room you're in, you feel watched. Not always threatened exactly, but never alone. I've tried telling whatever this is to leave. I've tried ignoring it. I've tried pretending it's nothing. But it keeps coming back in little ways, and now it feels like it's focused around my child's room. I've thought about asking the housing office to move us, but I'm scared to tell them the real reason. I don't want anyone looking at me like I'm unstable or making things up. We're supposed to leave the island in about a year, so part of me wonders if I should just wait it out. But another part of me feels like one more year in this house is too long. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know if anyone else has dealt with something like this, but I would really appreciate any advice. You're not going to believe this, but one of the strangest things I've experienced in years happened to me the other night. I've been trying to fall asleep for almost 2 hours. I was overheated, restless, and nothing felt right. My blankets felt too heavy, my pillow was lumpy, and I just could not get comfortable. Eventually, though, I drifted off. Then I had this incredibly vivid dream. In the dream, I was at this little gas station in my hometown. It was late, and there were maybe 9 or 10 people standing around in the parking lot. A couple of them were friends of mine, and the rest were people I didn't know. At first, everything seemed normal. We were all just talking, hanging out, and then I started noticing something was off. Every time my attention shifted, something would be gone. First, it was the people walking along the road nearby. Then the music and the background street noise faded out. Then the cars were gone. Then even some of the people in our group started disappearing too, one by one, like they'd never been there at all. And somehow, once it got down to maybe 5 of us, we all seemed to understand what was happening without anyone saying it out loud. It was this eerie feeling, like we had always known something was there with us, something hidden in plain sight, but we had never fully noticed it until that moment. It felt like some kind of alien presence. What made it even stranger was that it could communicate with people individually. It was like it could be having several separate conversations at once, even while all of us were staring right at the same space. Some people could hear it clearly, and some of us couldn't. I was one of the ones who couldn't understand it unless it came closer. There was almost this resistance, like whatever connected it to people didn't work the same on everyone. The people who disappeared didn't fade out or run off. They were just there, and then they were gone in an instant. Once there were only 4 of us left, we panicked and ran inside a small back room. One of the strangers decided he was going to confront whatever was out there. He rushed toward the chain-link fence near the side of the building, and then he vanished right at the corner. That part was horrifying. You know how someone disappears behind a wall when they turn a corner? It looked like that, except there was no solid wall there, just a fence you could see through. It made no sense at all, but that's exactly what happened. A second later, music started playing outside. Then the guy's car came rolling around the side of the building by itself. Its headlights were on at first, then they cut out. Right after that, there was this loud pounding at the door. The door was locked with a deadbolt, but then, just like everything else outside, it was suddenly gone. Ty opened the door. Standing there was this creature, around 6 feet tall, with slick greenish-yellow scales that looked almost oily under the light. Its eyes were deep-set and black, and its head was wide and almost square-shaped, broader at the sides than it should have been. But the body was thin and awkward, almost like a teenage boy's frame. And for some reason, it was dressed like a person. It had on a pale blue t-shirt and tan cargo shorts. It was moving its mouth and pointing at us like it was angry, like it was trying to tell us something urgently, but none of us could understand a word. Then I woke up. But when I did, I could still see my room. That's the part that really gets me. I could see everything, even with my eyes closed, except now there was this black cloud hovering above me. It looked almost alive, like one of those dark, shifting smoke-like forms from a supernatural TV show, except darker and heavier somehow. It wasn't drifting around randomly. It was holding itself in place. Then it slowly moved to my right and disappeared straight into the wall. I opened and closed my eyes again. This time there were several of them, maybe 5, hanging above me in a loose circle, like dark storm clouds. They didn't rush me or touch me or do anything dramatic. They just hovered there. So I finally got up, went to the bathroom, washed my face, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. The strangest part of all is that I never felt terrified. I wasn't panicking. I wasn't even really anxious. Through all of it, I felt weirdly calm, almost comforted, like whatever was there was only watching me and didn't mean me any harm. Except for that one shadow that slipped into the wall. That one felt different. It felt irritated, maybe even angry, but also like it either wouldn't or couldn't do anything. I still can't explain any of it. I just know it was one of the most unsettling, vivid, and unexplainable nights I've had in a very long time. Hey, I'm Mia, and I want to tell you about a few things that happened to me that I still can't properly explain. I grew up in a pretty new apartment building in Australia with my grandma and grandpa, and back then, my uncle lived with us too. We were way up on the 26th floor. You needed a key card just to use the elevator, and our front door was one of those heavy ones that made a very clear click whenever it opened or shut. So that's part of why all of this has stayed with me. Nothing about our place ever felt easy to get into unnoticed. The first thing happened when I was around 8 or 9. At the time, we had 1 cat, and because it was only a 2-bedroom apartment, I usually slept on the couch. But whenever my uncle stayed out late, I got to sleep in his room, which felt like a huge upgrade to me as a kid. One night, he'd gone out partying, and I remember being ridiculously pleased with myself because I was trying to pull an all-nighter. It had to be around midnight, maybe a little after, and I was lying there watching some random YouTube videos with the bedroom door open. Everything felt normal. Then I started hearing this sound from the kitchen. It was slow, steady, and sharp, like a knife hitting a chopping board over and over again. Not fast, not messy, just deliberate. Chop, chop, chop. At first, I wasn't scared. I told myself it had to be the TV, or maybe the cat messing with something. But then I looked beside me, and my cat was curled up right there. That's when my stomach dropped a bit. I called out to my grandparents, but neither of them answered. So I turned the TV volume all the way down, thinking maybe the sound was coming from the video, and I just hadn't noticed properly. But it kept going, clear as anything. That chopping sound stayed for several seconds, even after the room had gone quiet. I remember freezing completely. I'd heard people talk about sleep paralysis before, and for a second, I wondered if that was what was happening, except I knew I was awake. I could feel everything. I was just terrified. Then I turned the TV back up again, almost like I was trying to hide from the silence. The chopping seemed to fade behind it. A few moments later, I turned it down again, forced myself out of bed, and crept to the doorway. I looked straight into the kitchen. There was no one there, nothing moving, no sign anyone had been up. Just the kitchen bench, the dark apartment, and a knife sitting on the chopping board. I slammed the bedroom door, jumped back into bed, and stayed under the covers until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I went straight to my grandparents and asked if either of them had been in the kitchen, making food in the middle of the night. They looked confused and said no. Then they asked why on earth I'd been awake at that hour. I never had an answer that made sense, and I still don't. The second thing happened years later, after my uncle had moved out and that room had become mine. By then we had 2 cats, and I was older, old enough to tell myself I was too rational to get worked up over strange noises. My room had this huge wall of windows looking out over the city. Beautiful in the daytime, honestly a little unsettling at night. One evening, my grandparents were asleep, and I was sitting on my bed gaming on my laptop, just minding my own business. Then I heard knocking. Not from the door, from the window. I panicked, fully panicked. I ran out of the room with tears in my eyes, called a friend, and hid in the bathroom while trying to explain what was happening. This friend did not believe in paranormal stuff at all, and even they couldn't come up with a decent explanation. They just kept saying they didn't know. Eventually, I worked up the nerve to go back into my room. Everything looked completely normal. The knocking had stopped. The room was still. But there was a handprint on the window. I hadn't put it there. I stayed on that call for ages because I was too scared to be alone with it. I barely slept that night. Then there was the last thing, which honestly shook me in a different way because it happened so casually. I was on the phone with a friend, reading scary stories online late at night. I was near the end of one story when suddenly my bedroom light and fan switched off at the same time. The weird part was my TV stayed on, and I could still see light coming from under my door, so the rest of the apartment still had power. I walked out to the living room and saw my grandpa watching TV like normal, and my grandma had only just come home. A few weeks earlier, there'd been some issue where our room lights were weirdly connected after a remote got replaced, so I asked her if that was still happening. She said no, that problem had already been fixed, and she'd only just walked in anyway. She suggested maybe it was some odd power issue, but that didn't explain why only my light and fan went out while everything else in my room kept working. And afterward, both the light and fan worked perfectly fine like nothing had happened. So that's it. Those are the things that happened to me. I still get chills thinking about them, not because I want to believe something paranormal was there, but because I can't neatly explain any of it away. And maybe the strangest part is this. I never felt like whatever it was meant me harm. It felt unsettling, definitely. It frightened me badly, but it never felt hateful. just present. That said, I have woken up before with long scratches across my body that weren't there when I went to sleep. I always tried to brush that off because we have cats, and cats are tiny chaos machines with claws, but I lock them out of my room at night. So even that never sat quite right with me. I still don't know what to make of any of it. I just know I was there. I remember how it felt, and some things stay with you long after the sound stops. I've had a handful of experiences in my life that I still can't explain, and even now, telling you about them makes my skin crawl a little. The first one happened when I was a kid. Back then, my brothers, my younger sister Lila, my grandmother, and I all slept together in this huge bed. I was lying near the foot of it, facing an old slatted closet door across the room. I remember staring into the dark when I saw this shape ease its way out from that closet, like it had been hiding there the whole time. It had this strange outline, almost cartoonish in a creepy way, like a twisted little creature with long arms and a hunched back. It moved quietly at first, almost like it was trying not to be noticed. Then it stopped. Slowly, it turned and looked right at me. I froze. I was terrified. I grabbed for the covers and yanked them over myself, and I remember my sister pulling back because she was just as scared, though I didn't know that then. Years later, when we talked about it, she described that same night to me without me giving her details first. She remembered the figure, the way I snatched the blanket, even the panic between us. That was the moment that really shook me, because it meant I hadn't imagined it alone. The second time was much more recent. I was trying to fall asleep on my cousin's couch, facing a glass patio door. I opened my eyes for just a second, and there was a dark figure standing there, completely blocking the moonlight coming through the glass. I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping it would be gone when I looked again. But when I opened them, it was closer. Not by much, maybe a step or two, but enough to make my heart drop. I turned away so fast I thought I might be sick. When I finally worked up the nerve to look back, it was gone. That same figure, or something like it, was seen again later by my sister. She glanced down the hallway while walking past, stopped, looked again, and asked if anyone else had seen it. Nobody had, but the look on her face said enough. Then there was tonight. Honestly, this one nearly broke me. I was so scared I felt like I was right on the edge of a panic attack. I'd stepped out of the living room and gone into the camper to use the bathroom and check a spot on my forehead in the mirror. A minute later, my sister came rushing over, pulled open the camper door, and told me I needed to come with her right away. She was pale, visibly rattled. She said she'd heard a noise from the direction I'd gone, and when she checked, the door hadn't even been shut yet. Then, after she went back inside, she heard a voice. She couldn't make out words, just the unmistakable sound of someone, or something, speaking. That hit me hard, because I've heard things like that in that same place before. She also reminded me that earlier in the evening, she'd heard scratching at the bottom of the door and assumed it was the dog wanting in. Except the dog had been shut in the bedroom for hours. I know that for a fact because I'd been sitting at my computer near the dining area, and there was no way the dog could have gotten there without passing right by me. And that wasn't even the first strange thing in that camper. Another night, I was in the bathroom when I heard footsteps coming toward the door. They stopped right outside. I waited, expecting to hear whoever it was walk away, but I didn't. Then a few moments later, I heard the footsteps coming toward the door again, like they were repeating the same approach all over. When I finally opened the door, no one was there. I ran out of there so fast, it didn't even feel like thinking, just pure fear. Stuff like this has happened around us more times than I can count. Maybe there's an explanation for it. Maybe there isn't. I just know what it felt like in those moments. Real, immediate, and terrifying. And once you've felt that kind of fear more than once, it stays with you. I need to tell you about what's been happening, because I can't quite shake the feeling that something in that house has been wrong for a long time. From the very beginning, even before my granddaughter Marin really settled into that room, I never liked being in there by myself. It always felt off. Not in some dramatic movie way, just little things. Tiny noises when nothing had moved. Quick shadows slipping past the corner of my eye. The kind of thing you try to explain away because, frankly, life is already exhausting enough without wondering if your house is haunted. Marin was around 3 when they moved in, and maybe a year later, when she was 4, something happened that still sits with me. She was in her room playing while I was picking up toys, and she had this little toy mirror, one of those pretend vanity ones. She was staring straight into it and saying, in this low, strange voice, "I'm a demon. I'm a demon. I'm a demon." Over and over. I froze. Then, just like that, she stopped and acted completely normal, like she had no idea what she'd just said. I asked her where she heard it, who told her to say that, whether she was copying something from a show or a game. She just kept saying, "I don't know. I don't know." And she really seemed like she didn't know. Later I looked online, thinking maybe it was some silly mirror game kids had picked up somewhere, but I found nothing that matched it. Just the usual creepy stories people post online now. None of that makes me feel better, obviously. And it wasn't just Marin. My daughter's mother-in-law lived downstairs in the front bedroom because she was disabled, and she used to say she heard things too. Sometimes she'd hear what sounded like a baby crying or an animal yelping, even when there was absolutely nothing there. People blamed it on her memory getting worse, and maybe some of it was, but I'd seen enough little shadows and heard enough odd sounds myself that I couldn't dismiss it so easily. Then there was the projector. Marin had one that showed holiday pictures on the wall. One winter evening, she asked me to look at the Christmas images dancing around her room. So I looked up, expecting snowflakes and reindeer and all that cheerful nonsense. But what I saw were Halloween pictures. Gravestones, spiders, dark, creepy little shapes. I looked again because I honestly thought I must have mistaken it, but it was wrong. Completely wrong. I know how that sounds. I know I can't prove it. Still, I know what I saw. Now she's 7, and a couple nights ago she and her little sister were in the bathroom while I was nearby. The washer and dryer sit across from the toilet, and Marin suddenly asked me, "Grandma, what's that light that keeps coming on? The one that looks like a happy face, then a sad face." I turned around and asked her where. She pointed to the dark little display window on top of the dryer. The thing is, the dryer wasn't running. There was no reason for any light to be on at all, and it definitely doesn't make smiley faces or frowny faces. She said she saw it twice, but every time I turned to look, it was gone. I checked for reflections, checked the room, checked everything I could think of. Nothing. Then the next morning, when they went to check on my daughter's mother-in-law, she had passed away. She had been on hospice, so it wasn't a surprise exactly. We knew it was coming. But with the strange lights, the nightmares, the tension in the house, and everything all piling up at once, it felt like too much. Like all of it was somehow tangled together. And one more thing that's been bothering me. The last couple of days, Marin has been asking me where her heart is in her chest. Not once, not casually, several times, just out of nowhere. So I'm sitting here trying to make sense of it. Years ago, when they first moved into that house, My daughter was under an incredible amount of stress and started drinking heavily for a while. She eventually stopped, and not long after that, she got pregnant with my younger granddaughter. Then her husband started smoking marijuana constantly, morning to night, every single day. People love to argue about whether that counts as addiction, because humans will debate literally anything except the obvious. But when something becomes all day, every day, I pay attention. Someone told me addiction can draw dark things in, that it's like opening a door and letting something linger around a person or a home. I don't know what I believe. I don't know if this is grief, stress, bad dreams, a child picking up on adult tension, or something I can't explain. I just know that house has never felt right to me, and lately it feels heavier than ever. I still think about this sometimes, and even now, I cannot fully explain it. This happened in 2016, when I was 16. My parents had split up not long before that, and my dad had not found a permanent place yet, so he was staying at this little mobile home park near the water. It was the kind of place that got crowded with tourists and weekend visitors, especially in the warmer months. My older sister had stopped speaking to him after the divorce, so whenever I went to visit every other weekend, it was always just me. My dad had been struggling with alcohol for a long time, and that was a big part of why my parents separated. So when I stayed with him, it was pretty common for him to invite friends over at night. I dreaded those evenings. Nothing especially dramatic usually happened, but the whole place would fill up with drunk adults talking over each other, laughing too loudly, singing, arguing, smoking inside. The air felt heavy, and the whole place smelled like beer and cigarettes. Whenever that happened, I would just hide out in the bedroom and wait for it to be over. I would play games, keep the volume low, and count down the hours until everyone finally left. One night, I realized I had made a mistake. I had not eaten before people started showing up, and by the time the party finally died down, it had to be around 1:30 in the morning. I was starving. So I cracked open my door and listened the way I always did, just to make sure the apartment had gone quiet. There was nothing. No voices, no music, no movement. So I went to the kitchen to get something to eat, and that is when I saw him. There was a man sitting alone at the kitchen table. He was dressed like he had only just arrived, wearing a dark coat and a flat cap, and he was sitting completely still. That was the part that unsettled me most. He was not slouched over like someone passed out drunk. He was upright, motionless, silent. I froze for a second, then said something nervous like, "I thought everybody already left." I even gave this awkward little laugh, just trying to make it normal. But he did not answer. He did not look at me. He did not react at all. It was like he either had not heard me or did not care that I was there. I grabbed whatever food I could as fast as possible and went straight back to the bedroom. At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing. I figured maybe he was just completely wasted, too drunk to even process that I had spoken to him. So I let it go and went to sleep. The next morning, though, I brought it up to my dad. I asked him, "Who was that guy still in the kitchen after everyone left?" He looked at me and said, "What guy?" I told him, "The one sitting at the table. He had a coat on and a cap." My dad looked genuinely confused. Then he told me everyone had left together, and after that he had gone straight to bed. He said nobody stayed behind. I tried describing the man again, but he had no idea who I was talking about. He swore it was not one of his friends, and he has stuck to that ever since. And that is really it. Maybe it was nothing supernatural. Maybe there is some completely ordinary explanation, and I just never found out what it was. But the whole thing felt wrong in a way I still remember clearly. Nothing was missing. Nothing else happened. I never saw that man again. But even now, when I picture that kitchen, I can still see him sitting there in total silence, like he had been waiting for something I was never meant to understand. I want to tell you about something that happened to me a few years ago, and honestly, even now, I still don't know what to make of it. For a long time, I kept it to myself because I felt embarrassed, confused, and, if I'm being honest, a little scared. I'm not someone who usually jumps to paranormal explanations. I've always been skeptical about ghosts and things like that. But this experience has stayed with me, and I still can't fully explain it away. This happened when I was pregnant with my first baby, sometime around late 2021. Back then, my husband, Daniel, used to take me out all the time because I had this constant craving for pasta and breadsticks. It became our little ritual. But one day, I was already in a fragile place before we even got to the restaurant. At a recent appointment, my doctor had made a comment about my weight gain that hit me harder than she probably realized. I had already put on some weight by the third trimester, and she said something along the lines of, "The baby only accounts for so much of that." It might not sound like much to someone else, but to me, it cracked open something old and painful. I'd struggled with bulimia in the past. My husband was the only person who truly knew how bad it had once been. He understood how sensitive that subject was for me, and he was upset for me after the appointment. So we went out to eat, trying to salvage the day a little. After we ordered, I told him I needed to use the restroom. I'd already eaten earlier, and I remember standing there in the bathroom feeling overwhelmed by guilt and disgust with myself. The restroom was small, just a few stalls, quiet enough that every little sound seemed amplified. I checked around quickly, like I used to, making sure no one else was in there. I went into the first stall, closed the door, and after a moment, I started thinking about purging. I hate admitting that, but that's the truth. Then I heard the main restroom door open. I froze. I saw the shadow of someone's feet move past my stall and stop at the one beside me. I heard the stall door close. I remember staring at the floor, watching those shadows, thinking maybe I could still be quiet enough that no one would notice. And then, just as I turned back toward the toilet, I heard a woman's voice say, very clearly, "No." Not loud, not screamed, just firm, clear, direct. It startled me so badly, I stopped cold. My first thought was that somehow she knew exactly what I was about to do. Then I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was on the phone. Maybe she was talking to someone else. Maybe it was just strange timing. Still, something about it shook me enough that I didn't go through with it. I stepped out of the stall, washed my hands, and tried to calm myself down. But while I was standing there drying my hands, something started to bother me. I hadn't heard a lock click. I hadn't heard anyone sit down. I hadn't heard any movement at all after that voice. So I turned around. The stall next to mine was open. I just stood there staring at it. Then I checked the larger stall too. Empty. I even pushed the door wider, just to make sure I wasn't missing something obvious. There was no one there. No one. I remember this rush of cold going through me, and I got out of that bathroom as fast as I could. When I sat back down, my husband looked at me and immediately asked if I was okay. He said I looked pale. I told him I was just feeling nauseous and didn't say anything more. I wasn't ready. I was ashamed of why I'd gone in there in the first place, and I didn't know how to explain what had happened, but none of them ever fit perfectly. It wasn't until much later, nearly 2 years after it happened, that I finally told my husband the full story. I admitted why I'd gone into the bathroom, and I told him about the voice. And here's the strangest part. I never tried to purge again after that. Fear stopped me. Or maybe something else did. I still don't know whether what happened was paranormal, psychological, or just one of those moments in life that refuses to make sense. But whatever it was, it stopped me in that moment when I needed to be stopped. And somehow, that's the part I keep coming back to. I moved into a new apartment not long ago, right across from a cemetery. Honestly, at first I kind of loved it. The neighborhood is quiet, peaceful, and so close to my job that I can leave barely 10 minutes before my shift and still make it on time. In this economy, that almost feels supernatural by itself. But not long after I settled in, little things started happening around the apartment, and at first I kept brushing them off. The main one was my closet door. I'd noticed it standing open when I was sure I had shut it. At first, I told myself I was probably just forgetting, or rushing around and not closing it all the way. My partner, Mason, has a couple of pets, so I even thought maybe they were somehow getting into the room and nudging it open. I asked him to keep an eye on it too, and we made a point of closing the bedroom off so the animals couldn't get in. But even after that, we'd still wake up and find one side of the closet wide open. I know I shut it before bed. I even started saying it out loud to myself, like that would somehow make it stick. I kept telling myself it had to be the hinges. Old apartment, old doors, old problems. Fine. Then there was the lamp on my vanity. It sits right beside the closet, and every so often it would switch on by itself. I'd turn it off, and a few minutes later it would be glowing again. It happened enough times that it became this dumb little running joke every time I thought about the electric bill. Eventually, I unplugged it completely because I figured maybe the wiring was bad, and I didn't want to risk something more serious. Then one day I came home from work and found this white powdery stuff on my pillow. Just my pillow. The other side of the bed was completely clean. I stood there trying to make sense of it. It wasn't dandruff, and I hadn't spilled anything. We don't let the pets in the bedroom, so it couldn't have been litter. I even wondered if maybe dust or paint had somehow drifted in from outside, if someone nearby was doing repairs. None of it really made sense. It bothered me more than it probably should have, mostly because it felt like every strange thing in that apartment somehow ended up happening on my side, to my things. I stripped the bed and washed everything, and during all of this, I wasn't sleeping well. I started having these awful nightmares, the kind that stay with you after you wake up. They were always about people I love getting hurt, or dying, or me not making it in time to say goodbye. I tried to be rational about that too. I live overseas, far from my family, and I recently lost my grandfather. I couldn't be there for the funeral, and I know that guilt has been sitting in me heavier than I want to admit. So I kept telling myself the nightmares were grief, or stress, or homesickness, or work burnout. Something explainable, something human. But then today happened, and now I don't know what to think. I was standing in my bedroom, looking out the window, and I saw a bird on the sill. It looked terribly sick, barely holding itself up. I felt so bad for it. It's been really hot lately, and I thought maybe it was overheated from the sun beating down on the metal outside. I went over to check on it, hoping maybe I could do something, anything. But before I could help, it died right there on the windowsill. And of all places, it happened beside the same window near my vanity, near that lamp, near the closet door that won't stay shut. So I guess I'm asking because I genuinely don't know. Has anyone ever gone through something like this? Am I just overwhelmed and reading too much into a bunch of unrelated things? Or does this sound wrong to you too? If I'm being honest with you, I know this sounds like the kind of story people roll their eyes at. Every time I've told it, someone tries to explain it away, like there has to be a neat little answer for everything. Maybe there usually is. But that night still sits with me. A few years ago, my cousin Mason, my former boyfriend, and I decided to try randonauting. It was our first time doing it. We'd seen all these stories online about people setting an intention, saying it out loud, and then the app sending them to coordinates that somehow connected to what they were looking for. It sounded strange, but also kind of exciting, so we figured we'd give it a shot. We started with something harmless. I think we asked to find money or something lucky, just to keep it light. The coordinates led us into this really upscale neighborhood with huge homes and iron gates. The GPS kept trying to direct us right up to a gated driveway on private property, and there was no way we were going to cross onto someone's land, so we just laughed it off and moved on. For the second one, we asked to see something beautiful. This time it brought us to another large property out in a quieter area. We stayed on the road, of course, but from where we were, we could see this wide stretch of open land behind the house. There were deer all across it, more than I'd ever seen in one place before, many of them tagged. The whole scene was glowing in the late evening light, and for a minute it really did feel beautiful, calm, almost unreal in a peaceful way. By then, the sun was dropping and everything was getting dimmer, so naturally, because human beings love making bad choices for entertainment, we decided to ask for something creepy. The next location took us to a house maybe 15 minutes away. When we pulled up, the front porch was covered in dolls. Not just one or two. There were old cloth dolls, porcelain ones, little cracked faces staring out from chairs and tables, some hanging oddly from the porch like decorations no sane person would choose. I remember feeling this cold little twist in my stomach. I told my ex to keep driving because I didn't want to stick around long enough for someone to come outside and explain why their porch looked like a nightmare. That should have been the end of it. It really should have. But Mason wanted to do one last round before heading home, and once again we asked for something spooky. The app sent us toward a lake. To get there, we had to drive down this long, lonely road with woods on both sides. It was one of those places where the trees feel too close, like they're leaning in. The coordinates stopped at a patch on the side of the road and directed us to get out and walk into the woods at a very specific point. So we did. When we stepped up to where the app was pointing, the first thing I noticed was the grass. It was tall everywhere else, but right there it was flattened, like something had been standing there or moving through it. It lined up almost perfectly with the coordinates. That alone made my skin crawl. I remember standing there and feeling my whole body tense up while Mason, trying to act brave, stepped farther in. Then we heard voices. My ex pulled off fast, and because of the road layout, we had to keep going toward the lake to turn around. I happened to look back through the rear window, and that's when I saw it. There was a figure standing near the edge of the woods. Tall, dark, unmistakably shaped like a person, but something about it felt wrong. There were fireflies all around that stretch of road, flickering in the trees and over the brush, which actually made the outline of it easier to see. And then I saw it shift, like it turned to face us. That's the part I can still picture so clearly. Where its face should have been, I saw what looked like eyes. Not like the fireflies, not blinking in and out, not drifting. Steady, fixed, watching us. I grew up in church, so I was raised believing there are things in this world we don't fully understand. Spirits, darkness, whatever name you want to give it. But I had never seen anything myself that made me feel that kind of fear. Not movie fear, not jump scare fear. I mean the kind that hits you all at once and makes your chest lock up. I started crying right there in the car. Mason was shaking too, and he kept saying he saw it, that he saw it too. It's been years now, and I still think about it sometimes. usually when I'm driving down a dark road at night and the trees are too close to the shoulder. Friends have told me it was probably just the fireflies messing with my eyes, and I understand why they say that. I really do. But what I remember is different. I remember that those lights didn't flicker like the others. I remember the way the head seemed to turn, and the way the eyes became visible the same way a real person's eyes do when they angle their face toward you. Maybe people can explain every part of it. Maybe they can't. I just know what I saw, and I've never forgotten it. This happened when I was about 20, and now I'm in my late 40s. Even after all this time, I still find myself coming back to that night and wondering what exactly I experienced. I've told this story to a lot of people over the years, and no one has ever told me they went through anything quite like it. If you have, I'd honestly love to know. When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of nights at my mother's parents' house. It was much closer to the center of town, which made life easier whenever I was out late with friends, instead of heading all the way back to my parents' place on the edge of the city. One night, when I was around 20, I got back to my grandparents' house after watching a match with a few friends. Nothing felt unusual. I got ready for bed, brushed my teeth, and lay down flat on my back, just letting my mind drift. I wasn't half asleep, and I wasn't dreaming. I was fully awake. A few minutes later, I heard something from the basement. At first, I couldn't make sense of it. Then, it became unmistakable. It sounded like a woman screaming, not creaking pipes, not the wind, not the house settling. It was loud, raw, and human. I sat straight up in bed and listened. Within maybe half a minute, the sound started moving. It seemed to travel from the basement up to the main floor, then up the staircase toward the second floor where I was. It kept getting closer, fast enough to make my stomach drop. Then it stopped right outside my bedroom door. My door was shut, so I never saw anything. But the screaming was right there, just beyond the door. It was unbelievably loud, and it went on for what felt like 30 seconds, maybe a little less. Then it moved away. I heard it retreat down the stairs, back toward the basement, and then it was gone. Just like that, and I never heard it again. I know how this sounds. My family and friends figured I must have been dreaming, and honestly, I understand why they thought that. I probably would have said the same thing if I were hearing this from someone else. But I wasn't asleep. That's the part I've never been able to shake. I was awake the whole time, sitting there in bed, listening as it unfolded. The only woman in the house that night was my grandmother, and she was already quite old then. She could still manage the stairs, but not quickly, and definitely not at the speed this sound seemed to move. The house itself was old too, with a long staircase that curved between floors. There's no way she could have gone from the basement to outside my room that fast. The next morning, I asked both of my grandparents whether they'd heard anything during the night. Neither of them had. So over time, I narrowed it down to two possibilities, neither of them very comforting. Either I experienced some kind of episode and heard something that wasn't there, or I heard something I can't explain. Whatever it was, it stayed with me. Even now, decades later, I still think about that night. It changed something in me. It made life and death feel a little less certain, a little less neatly explained than I'd assumed. I know I'll probably never get a real answer, but if you've ever gone through something similar, I'd truly like to hear about it. You know, I still think about that place sometimes. It was at Watuba Heights in Fall River, Massachusetts. Back then, I used to think of Fall River as this strange little city that carried ghosts in its bones. Even the Lizzie Borden house sat there like some warning at the edge of town. The housing complex is gone now, by the way. I went back years later while visiting my mom near Boston, and it had all been cleared out. Just an empty field. That almost felt creepier somehow. When I was about 8 or 9, I spent most of my time at my cousin's place. Her name was Serena, and she was my best friend. We were together constantly, especially in the summer. We'd stay outside with the neighborhood kids until midnight, sometimes even later, playing manhunt, cops and robbers, kick the can. All those games kids used to play when people still left their doors unlocked and trusted the night a little more than they should have. But that house had stories. Serena had told me for a long time that strange things happened there. Not just to her, but to her sister Yolanda and her brother Donnie too. The place was set up with 2 floors. You walked in, and the stairs were right in front of you leading upstairs. The living room was off to the left, and beyond that was the kitchen. Upstairs there was a bathroom and 2 bedrooms. In her parents' room, there was supposed to be the spirit of a child in the closet, and Serena believed he showed himself to her sometimes to protect her. In Donnie's room, there was something else. A woman in white. My family was always into horror and paranormal stuff. Honestly, we were the kind of people who swapped ghost stories at dinner like it was normal conversation. And for me, it always felt a little too real. I've always been sensitive to things like that. I can sense things sometimes, and every now and then I see them too. Even now, as an adult, I still get sleep paralysis pretty regularly. So this one night, Serena was acting off. Snappy, irritated. She kept getting on the other kids for little things during the game. At first, I didn't think much of it because kids argue. That's just what happens. We were playing cops and robbers across the whole housing area, and I was one of the robbers. When the cops started counting, we all scattered. I ran down a little hill behind Serena's building. I was always scared of that area at night because I already believed it was haunted. I had seen enough weird things out there before. So even when I hid, I stayed close to her house, thinking if I got scared, I could run inside. Which, honestly, makes no sense now. Like somehow ghosts would respect property lines. Human logic is amazing. Anyway, when I got near the back of the house, I saw one of the girls, Vanessa. We called her Vanna sometimes, but I'll call her Vanessa here. She was on my team, so I relaxed for a second. But then I noticed how oddly she was standing. Just out in the open. Not even trying to hide. Her back was stiff, her head tilted a little, and she looked blank. I ran up to her and said, "You have to move. They're going to find you." I tugged her arm, but she barely reacted. Then suddenly, it was like she snapped back into herself. She looked at me in this strange way, like she had something important to say. So I asked her, "What is it?" And she said, kind of hoarse, "Have you talked to your cousin? I think something's wrong." I remember blinking at her and saying, "What do you mean?" I told her I'd talked to Serena. But right then, the air changed. It got colder. Not just cooler, but cold in that heavy, unnatural way that makes your skin tighten. And my eyes drifted up to the second floor of Serena's house. I got this awful feeling in my stomach. Without even thinking, I said, "Since she's a cop, I'll let her catch me and talk to her." I turned back toward where Vanessa had been standing. She was gone. Just gone. No footsteps, no rustling, no sound at all. I spun around looking everywhere, but there was nobody there. And it was so dark and so still, and I suddenly had that horrible feeling that I was not alone. Then I heard one of the boys, Mickey, yell, "I see one! Guys, over here!" I jumped and bolted in the opposite direction. As I rounded the side of Serena's building, somebody grabbed my sweater and yanked me behind a little shack. I almost screamed, but it was Serena. I let out the biggest breath of relief and said, "It's you." She laughed and said, "Gotcha. You're way too easy to find." I was still trying to catch my breath, but then I told her, "I ran into Vanessa. She said something seemed wrong with you." Serena looked confused right away. "When did you see Vanessa?" I said, "Just now. She was standing out in the field." And then Serena got very serious. She used my Cambodian nickname, the way she only did when something really mattered. She said, "Kamau, Vanessa went home at the start of the game. Her mom called her in. You saw her leave." And I swear my whole body went cold. I started stuttering. No, I talked to her. She asked me to check on you." Serena looked scared, and then she said quietly, "It's happening more now." I asked her what she meant, and she told me that that very morning she had been in the bathroom when she heard someone calling her in Khmer, softly, gently, like her mother would, telling her to come out. But her mother wasn't home. She was at the store. Serena said the voice kept calling for her, and she almost opened the door until she heard the real front door downstairs and her mother's actual voice calling her to help bring in groceries. That shook me. It shook both of us. I just hugged her. She started crying, and that scared me more than the story did because Serena was tough. She didn't cry easily. She told me she didn't even want to sleep in the house that night. Normally she slept on the couch anyway, with the TV on, because she didn't want to bother her older sister. And since I was sleeping over, I told her I'd stay with her. I said, "It's okay. I'm here. We'll stay up as long as we can." She gave me this weak little smile. Not long after that, the other kids wanted to stop playing and go home. Later we found out some of them had seen long, dark shadows moving around, and a few swore something had chased them. So Serena and I went inside. We'd completely forgotten about dinner, but my aunt had left rice and beef stir-fry on the stove for us, and we were starving. We piled food onto plates, grabbed juice from the fridge, and ate in the kitchen like everything was normal. Kids are weird like that. You can be one breath away from terror and still think, well, at least there's food. Afterward, we sat on the couch watching TV. From the couch, we had a clear view of the stairs going up to the second floor. Her parents were at work. Yolanda and Donnie were out for the night with my older sister. It was just the two of us in the apartment, close to 1 in the morning. At some point, I started drifting off. Then I felt Serena's hand on my knee, gently shaking me awake. My heart dropped so hard it felt like it hit the floor. I looked toward the stairs without fully turning, just enough to see the top landing where the ceiling met the staircase. And there she was. A woman crouched at the top of the stairs. She had long dark hair hanging over most of her face, but I could see one eye. Just one. Watching us. Her hands were on her knees, and her head was tilted in this unnatural way, like she was studying us. I froze. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then, all at once, she slammed her hand against the railing. The sound cracked through the room. Serena squeezed my knee so hard it hurt, but I barely felt it. I was too busy staring because I could not make myself look away. And then the woman started to stand. Serena whispered, "She's coming down." And she did. One step at a time. The stairs creaked under her weight. Her hand dragged and struck the railing as she moved, and every sound made us flinch. It was slow, deliberate, like she wanted us to feel every second of it. Then Serena jumped up and told me to close my eyes. I tried, I really did, but I was so terrified that after only a second or two, I opened them again. Serena had run to the front door and flipped on the light switch. And just like that, the woman was gone. Serena ran back, grabbed me off the couch, and dragged me into Yolanda's bedroom. She slammed the door behind us, and we stayed in there the rest of the night. We didn't sleep at all. We waited for her parents to come home, and when they did, we told them everything. Later, her mom had a monk come bless the house. For a little while, things got quieter, calmer, but it never stayed gone for good. And the next day, we found out Vanessa had gotten really sick that same night. High fever, hospital, the whole thing. She was out for several days. Not too long after that, once the lease ended, Serena's family moved to another housing unit in a different part of the city. But I never forgot that night. Even now, when I think about Watupa Heights being just an empty field, I wonder what's really gone and what's only hiding. Some places don't let go of what happened there. And some nights, I still feel like that woman is standing at the top of the stairs, waiting for someone to look up. When I think back on the strange things that have followed me through life, I always end up in the same place, my childhood home. That's where it all seemed to begin. My name's Mara, and I was the oldest of 3. My younger sister was a few years behind me, and my little brother was younger still. Back then, my sister and I shared a room at the very end of a long hallway, and my brother slept in the room just beyond the wall, both rooms facing out toward the backyard. I never liked being alone in that bedroom. I couldn't explain it then, and honestly, I still can't explain it now. But almost every time I stepped out into that hallway at night, I had this awful feeling that someone was right behind me. So close I could almost feel their breath on the back of my neck. I'd bolt down the hall and run straight into the living room like my life depended on it. My family thought I was dramatic, maybe a little odd, and eventually nobody even asked why. We just never talked about it. At night, after the lights were out and my sister had drifted off, something even stranger would happen. Between the 2 closet doors across from my bed, this tiny ball of light would appear. At first it was no bigger than a marble, but then it would stretch and widen into this glowing bluish-white oval, tall enough to reach nearly halfway up the wall. The only way I've ever known how to describe it is this. It looked like what a doorway to somewhere else might look like. I'd pull the blanket over my head and stay there until I either fell asleep or it was gone. My sister never saw it. I asked her once while it was happening, and she mumbled at me to be quiet and let her sleep. A few years later, I moved into my own room at the front of the house, and for a while, things felt normal again. But then my little brother started coming into my room at night. He'd stand there half asleep, scared out of his mind, telling me there was a man in his closet, or sometimes outside his window, just staring in and refusing to leave. Our parents brushed it off, but I could tell he was terrified. So I stopped questioning it. I'd just move over and let him crawl into bed beside me. Then came the night that changed everything. I was about 18, maybe 19, and my parents were heading out of town for the weekend. They asked me to stay at the house with my brother and sister to make sure nobody got into trouble, which, honestly, was funny to me because I was hardly the picture of responsibility. Still, we ended up having a quiet night. No party, no chaos, nothing like that. We were all in the living room watching a movie when the dog went to the door. He needed to go out, and beside the front door there was this big window that looked toward the side gate leading into the backyard. The backyard was fully fenced in with tall wooden panels, and that gate was the only way in or out. The second I opened the door, the dog completely lost it. He started barking, growling, then shrinking back behind my legs like he wanted no part of whatever was out there. I looked up, and at the far end of the walkway stood a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, older. He had on worn denim overalls over a pale shirt, and there was a red handkerchief hanging from his chest pocket. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there, staring straight at me. When we finally came back inside, shaken and trying to decide whether to call the police, my brother asked me what the man looked like. I described him as best I could, and I watched all the color drain from my brother's face. He got very still, looked right at me, and said, "That's the man I used to see in my closet." I can still feel the chill that went through me when he said it. That night, all three of us slept in the living room with every light in the house turned on. Years later, when we were all adults, I brought it up again. My brother and sister both claimed they didn't remember any of it. I never believed that. Some things leave too deep a mark to just vanish. Then, years after that, my son was born. He was a big baby from the start and just kept growing. His father and I aren't especially tall, and neither side of the family is full of giants. So one day I asked my mom where in the world all that height came from. She told me my grandfather's side had some very tall men in it. Then she mentioned that one of my grandfather's brothers, who had died long before I was born, had been well over 7 feet tall. The second she said that, my mind went right back to the man standing by that gate. We never found a photograph of him, but when I asked my mom what he looked like, every detail lined up. The height, the build, the clothes. And in that moment, I had this deep, unmistakable feeling that the man I saw that night wasn't a stranger at all. I think he was family. I think he came to keep watch over us, or maybe just to make sure we stayed in line while our parents were gone. And honestly, whether that's true or not, it worked. We behaved. I've wanted to tell you this story for a long time because it happened to my Aunt Rosita when she was very young, maybe 5 or 6 years old, and it stayed with her for the rest of her life. My family has a piece of land up in the mountains outside a little town in Honduras, a place that's been there since the 1800s. It's the kind of land where fruit grows wild, especially guavas, and back then the children would wander around picking them straight from the trees. One afternoon, Rosita was out there with her brothers and sisters looking for guavas when she spotted one that caught her eye immediately. She always described it as the most beautiful guava she had ever seen. Huge, golden, perfectly ripe. Naturally, she went after it. But every time she reached for it, it seemed to be just beyond her fingers. So she kept walking toward it, thinking she was only taking a few more steps. Then a few more. Then a few more after that. Before she realized it, the fruit was gone. She looked around, and everything had changed. It had been bright midday just moments before, but suddenly it felt dark around her, almost like evening had fallen without warning. She didn't recognize the trees. The brush was thick, and the path she'd been on had completely disappeared. She was just standing there alone in the middle of dense foliage, confused and frightened. Then, out from the bushes, a small man appeared. She said he was short, with a large pointed hat that looked too big for his body, and she could never clearly see his face. In that area, people call a being like that El Duende, a goblin or forest spirit. Rosita always believed that was exactly what she saw. She said it kept jumping in and out of hiding, tugging at her dress, brushing against her, trying to startle her. It didn't attack her outright, but it felt like it wanted to frighten her, to keep her upset and disoriented. Then she noticed it reaching toward the crucifix she wore around her neck. My family was deeply Catholic, and the children all wore crosses. The moment Rosita realized this little figure was trying to snatch hers, she grabbed the crucifix in both hands, squeezed it tightly against her chest, shut her eyes, and began to pray as hard as she could. When she finally opened her eyes, everything was different again. It was daylight, clear daylight, and right in front of her was a narrow path that hadn't been there before. On that path stood 2 white doves. She said they were very close to her, close enough that she felt she should have been able to reach out and touch them, but somehow she never could. Still, they stayed just ahead of her, and she followed them. Step by step, They led her through the brush and back toward the cabin where her parents and siblings were staying. When she arrived, the whole family was in a panic. She had not been gone for an hour, or even just the afternoon. She had been missing for a full day. Everyone had been searching for her, calling her name, looking through the land for any sign of her. What terrified them most was that she couldn't have wandered very far, and yet somehow she had heard none of them. Rosita was exhausted when she got back. She went straight to bed, and afterward she came down with a high fever. She turned pale, broke out in cold sweats, and stayed weak for days. What makes the story even stranger is that people in that region have told similar stories for generations. Usually it's about little girls, often around 5 to 8 years old, who go missing and later return saying they saw a small man wearing a tall, pointed hat. That's why this story has stayed with me. It isn't just one odd family memory. It's part of a much larger pattern people there still talk about. I still don't know what to make of it completely. Maybe it was something supernatural. Maybe it was something no one could explain. But for Rosita, it was absolutely real, and she carried that certainty with her forever. I was 19 that summer, freshly holding my driver's license like it was some kind of golden ticket. In Mongolia, family road trips during the warm months are a whole production. Grandparents, cousins, aunts, siblings, too many bags, not enough space. And somehow, everybody still insists on bringing more. Since my parents had split up years earlier and my mom couldn't come, she asked me to drive my father's old car and take my little brother along with the rest of the family. Honestly, I wasn't nervous. I was thrilled. It felt like freedom. That evening, we all gathered at my grandmother's place to load everything up. There were several cars, plus a porter packed with supplies, blankets, cooking gear, all the usual things people swear they absolutely need. My brother and I ended up stuffing extra bags into our car, the things that wouldn't fit anywhere else. We finally pulled out around sunset, maybe a little after 7. A couple of hours later, we stopped at a big supermarket on the edge of the city to buy last-minute supplies. For some reason, every family seems to do this before a long trip, like it's part of the ritual. After that, we kept driving deep into the night. I was having the best time. Loud music, energy drinks, the windows cracked open, feeling like I owned the road. Then my phone rang. It was my grandmother. One of the cars had broken down, so we turned back and found the others pulled off near the main road. Since it was already so late, we set up tents and slept there for the night. I still remember how bitterly cold it felt, even though it was the middle of summer. The next morning, I woke up to kids running around, older relatives talking over hot tea, and the whole camp slowly coming back to life. Later in the day, one of my grandmother's relatives arrived with a spare tire. The men fixed the car while the rest of us cleaned up and got everything packed again. By late afternoon, we were moving. The road after that was long and rough. Dirt tracks, open land, no bathrooms, no real landmarks, just occasional stops for fuel and quick breaks out in the open. One of the older men told me a trick about offline maps. He said if you load the route while you still have signal, it stays usable even after you lose service, and then updates again when you reconnect. At the time, that felt like expert wisdom. We drove until nearly midnight, following one of the other vehicles and trusting a map that only half made sense. At one point, my brother needed to pee, and honestly, I did too, so we pulled over. We took care of it, got back into the car, and started driving again. But the others were gone. At first, I wasn't worried. I thought I was still on the right path, and maybe they had just gone farther ahead than I realized. I kept driving, figuring I'd eventually catch up or get close enough to a signal and call. My brother had fallen asleep in the back. About an hour later, around 1:30 in the morning, I pulled over again. I wanted to step outside, clear my head, have a cigarette, and figure out what to do next. I switched on the hazard lights in case the others came up behind me. That was when I smelled it. It hit me all at once. Sharp, rotten, heavy, like something spoiled and sick and deeply wrong. The sky was bright with moonlight, and there was nothing around me. No trees, no buildings, just empty desert stretching in every direction. I looked around, trying to find where the smell was coming from, and then I saw something a short distance away. It looked like a pale pink blanket, rolled up and left in the dirt. Without really thinking, I walked toward it, and what I saw there has never left me. It was the body of a small child. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a dark shape. I didn't turn around. I don't know why, but every part of me was screaming the same thing. Do not look back. I felt with absolute certainty that something was behind me, something close. I ran. I got into the car, slammed the door shut, and drove like a madman. I don't remember much about that stretch of road. I can't tell you clearly what I saw, or whether anything was truly following me. What I do remember perfectly is the fear. It was total. It felt like being hunted, like something had noticed me. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. When I finally got a signal, it was around 2:50 in the morning. I called the police. They told me to wait, and later, 2 officers brought me to the station. They asked me everything: where I was, what I saw, what landmarks I remembered, how far off the road I had been. I told them as much as I could. My brother slept through all of it. I never woke him up. I didn't want him frightened. When he stirred later, I just told him we had stopped for gas. I called my family, found out I'd gone the wrong direction, and eventually caught up with them. We finished the trip, and on the surface, everything after that was normal. But I wasn't. For months, I barely slept. A few weeks later, the police called me back. They told me they had found the pink blanket I described, but there was no body. They asked if I had seen blood, drag marks, another person, anything that could help. I told them the truth. I wasn't even completely sure what I had seen beyond that terrible image and the shadow I caught in the corner of my eye. It wasn't enough to give them anything useful. Years passed. Then more recently, I heard there had been multiple kidnappings in that region around the same time we had been traveling there. I still don't know whether what I saw was connected to any of that. I don't know what happened to that child, or where the body went, or what that shadow really was. But the police finding that blanket told me one thing for certain. I hadn't imagined it. And somehow, that truth has always been more frightening than if it had all been a hallucination. Even now, what stays with me most is not just what I saw, but the feeling. That pure, overwhelming terror. The certainty that something was behind me in the dark, and that if I looked back, something terrible would happen.